It being 7 o'clock and a quorum is present, I'd like to call the public hearing to order. A motion is in order to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's made, seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? A couple of introductory remarks. Under the statute, we are required annually to hold a public hearing on the CPC status, projects, and so on. This is that hearing. Immediately after this hearing, we will adjourn the public hearing and open our normal monthly public open meeting to discuss business. So we are not here at this meeting to discuss the merits of a particular project. We are here to give you a report on the status of the CPA and the CPC accounts. And that having been said, I would start by saying that to date, we have collected something on the order of $8 million, 20% of which is from matching funds from the state. The match this year was $143,000, which was up $20,000 from last year. Those of you who attended town meeting probably heard someone say that when Boston joins, we would expect the distribution to go down. Well, Boston has joined, it got a distribution this year, and our distribution went up $20,000 this year. The reason the distribution went up is the state legislature now for 2 years has added to the pool available for CPC distribution. This year it was $10 million. So the pool is growing, and we anticipate that it will continue to grow because communities all over the Commonwealth are joining. No communities have left the CPA, none. But communities are joining because they understand the value of joining. What that does is it adds voice to the number of communities that are urging the legislature to enact supplemental sources of revenue for the CPA fund. And in fact, twice now they have done it. And with the new pressure coming from the bigger cities and towns, I think that pressure will increase. And so while we can't plan on it, we have a record of 2 times now increasing the pool, and we hope that that will not only continue, but increase in the future. The other reason I'm optimistic about that is that now, with the addition of this year's communities, there is a community in every state senatorial district in the state. So every state senator now I don't mean the national senators, I mean the senators who go to Capitol Hill in Beacon Hill, have within their jurisdiction a CPA community. So that also adds the voice. All of that having been said, we have received now almost, well, more than with this year's distribution, about $1.6 million in matching funds. And as was stated at town meeting, and I have the computation here to demonstrate it, the question is, what is the tax burden imposed by the CPA? I went to the assessor's office about 2 weeks ago and asked for real numbers relating to the CPA cost for a single-family home and condominium in Stoughton. They gave me the numbers, and so this is current information as of 2018, fiscal year 2018. In 2018, the average single-family home was assessed at $343,958. That's the average. There were homes that were higher, of course, in value, and there were homes that were lower in value. But if you take that average, under the CPA, the first $100,000 of the assessment of a single-family home is exempt from the CPA tax. So for CPA purposes, the average value of a home in Stoughton is $243,958. That's to say $100,000 less. Using the fiscal year 2018 tax rate, the tax on the CPA tax on a single-family home is $3,613.02. You apply 1.5% to that to compute the final CPA tax. That comes to $54.20 a year. So the average single-family home in Stoughton pays $54.20 a year in CPA taxes. That will be higher for houses that have a higher assessment and lower for families that have houses that have a lower assessment. If you then divide the number of single-family homes and condominiums in Stoughton, that number is 8,313. There's 8,313 units of individual single-family homes and condominiums in Stoughton. You divide that into the total receipts that we get from the CPA, from all sources, and it comes to $101.60. So for a single-family home paying $54.20, the town receives $101.60, even with the low match. It's a very good deal in my opinion. It's also as if for every project that we approve, we have a matching grant of at least 19% and as much as 20%. So it's, in our view, a very good deal. We have approved and town meeting, well, first of all, understand, the CPA can't spend any money except for money on projects that are approved by town meeting. We recommend, we do not spend. In addition, we don't originate most projects. The CPA as a committee doesn't initiate any project. We respond to anyone, a citizen or otherwise, who comes before us and asks for CPA funds. We have a CPA plan. It is on record on our website, on the town website. Go to the townofstoughton.gov, look under boards and commission, go to CPA. There's a long list of things we do, including our projects, but there's also a category of the CPA plan. Click on the CPA plan and it will tell you how to go about filing an application. Because you file an application does not mean you will get our recommendation. It's important for you to know that under the CPA law, the CPA is a vetting organization. We receive the application, we consider it, and we make a judgment as to whether it meets our criteria, it establishes our priorities, and it is a reasonable project that we think has community benefit. On that basis, we would recommend it to town meeting. Town meeting has the right to accept our recommendation and fund it, or deny our recommendation and not fund it. But town meeting cannot approve a CPA expenditure unless this committee has vetted the project and makes a positive recommendation. If some, and therein lies one of the problems that we've been struggling with. People can pass a petition, and for an annual town meeting it takes 10 signatures. For a special town meeting it takes 100 signatures. Anyone can pass around a petition in town, get those signatures and put the article in the warrant. And what happens, and by the way, the selectmen also have the right to put articles in the warrant. And those articles can say CPA funding. We have no way to stop someone from putting in an article that says they're going to use CPA funds to fund it. But that doesn't mean that they're going to get CPA funds, and it doesn't mean that they even can ask for CPA funds at the town meeting, because they can't. Under the statute, they must first come to the CPA, ask for funding, and ask for a positive recommendation. If we give the positive recommendation, town meeting has the right to pass it or not pass it, and to pass it with funding. If we don't give a recommendation, town meeting still has the right to pass that article, but not with CPA funding. In other words, it would be with municipal funding at that point. And the town meeting can decide whether it wants to fund it from municipal funds or not. All of that is by way of introduction. What we have in funding now is the following, because people have asked questions about debt service and why we bond and so on. When we see when someone comes before us, they usually don't ask for bonding, or they don't ask for cash, they ask for approval of a project. We look at our finances and make a decision as to whether it's appropriate to bond it or not bond it. We do not make a judgment as to how many years it will be bonded for. The treasurer of the town makes that judgment when the bond is issued. So if it's a 20-year bond, a 10-year bond, or a 30-year bond, that has to do with the useful life of the project. That decision is made by the town treasurer, not by this commission. And so why do we pick bonding? Let's take the case of the biggest matter we've ever bonded, and that was the Glen Echo. We authorized $1.5 million for the Glen Echo project purchase, and that 1.5 million, by the way, we did that knowing that the purchase price was 1.2 million. But we also knew that the state requires that we give to a third party a conservation easement, both for the recreation area and for the conservation area. Remember that Glen Echo has 6 acres of active recreation and 91 acres of conservation land. For both of those, you need to give a conservation easement to an outside third party. That was imposed by the state legislature because the state legislature says if you're going to use CPA money, we must know that that will be used for conservation and recreation for no other purpose. And so we want a second set of eyes monitoring that program to make sure that the town doesn't sneak in and build a fire station, a public safety building, whatever it is that the town wants to build on conservation land. All right, so why did we bond that? That project came to us very early. At that time, we had $1 million or so in our fund. We were getting something on the order of $650,000 a year. In 2 years, we had 1.2 million. We needed 1.5 million to buy the property and to pay all of the expenses. We knew that there would be cash flow over the next several years, so we bonded it. And that meant that, and by the way, at the time we bonded it, the interest rates were in the 2% range, or in the 1.8% range. So it made very good sense to bond that project. Other projects were also bonded, but we also paid in cash for some major projects. For example, the town hall windows and restoration project was $700,000. We voted to authorize that expenditure. Town meeting approved it, and it was paid in cash. And we have others, like I think it was the Halloran Playground bonded.
That was bonded.
That was bonded. Yeah, there's another major cash project, and that was just one moment. Oh, the historical replacement doors and windows in the Lucius Platt building, almost $500,000. That was not bonded. That was paid in cash. So at this point, we have about $3.5 million in the undesignated fund. I'm going to say a few more things and hopefully take questions from you folks. But first, understand the law requires that we can only fund projects in 4 categories, 3 major categories: conservation, which includes conservation, open space, and recreation. So it actually subdivides into recreation and conservation. Housing, which includes many different theories and themes for assisted living, rent subsidies, programs that keep people who can't afford taxes in their homes. Communities all over the Commonwealth are approaching basically assisted living, assisted in the sense of subsidized living with different formulas. It's a broad category, but basically it means subsidized housing, affordable housing in a town. And they put that under CPA because housing in Massachusetts is virtually at the crisis stage. People just don't have homes. And the third is historic preservation. And that's been one that we've often dipped into. We have done it for the Lucius Clapp building, we've done it for the town hall. And by the way, in both of those cases, that kind of money would have had to come from the municipal funds if it hadn't come from the CPA. Or the buildings would have continued to deteriorate and the cost of improving them would have gone up. So the only money we can spend without town meeting approval is our administrative budget. And it's 5% of our total funds, which comes to about $40,000 a year. And we use that for printing and for
Total annual funds.
total annual funds, yeah. And it comes to about $40,000 a year now. We use that to pay our program administrator and printing and advertising and notices and so on. With that having been said, I'd like to open it up to questions, if there are any. Yes,
I think.
could you identify?
Oh, sorry, my name's Jess Miner, I'm on the finance committee.
And please come up and use the mic because this is being recorded for television and people want to hear the question. You don't have to move the mics, that's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name?
Yeah, I'm Jess Miner, I'm on the finance committee. So I think that one of the questions about using cash versus bonds was not about the higher end projects and costs like Glen Echo, but was rather around some of the smaller
Yeah.
projects. I think maybe the cupola was one of the ones that was raised, 220,000, I think I recall, something like that. So could you explain the decision to take out loans for those kind of smaller projects and why we would do that rather than just use
The
the cash?
cupola of the building is one you have in mind. It was 280,000 or
280,
something
okay.
like that.
Right, and that
yeah.
was bonded, right? That
Yes.
was-
I can just say that when we look at these things, we try to look not just backwards, but forward. And we need to know, what's going on in that category. Now, we've already spent $700,000 in that category for the doors and windows. And we spent another couple of $100,000 for pointing the building to make it waterproof. And we spent $160,000 for the slate roof. So we've pretty much exhausted that category. And so what we decided to do was bond that project. But your question is a good one, and that's why. We had already spent more than $1 million on the town hall. And this one came along, and by the way, caught us by surprise.
Okay.
But we recognized the value and we bonded it.
Okay, and then just one other quick question. Do we do any projects toward assisted living?
Say it again?
Do we do any projects toward assisted living? I feel like I hear more about buildings, conservation, historical preservation, but I'm curious to know whether or not the CPA is putting any funds toward helping to offset costs for,
Well, what we need is someone to come up with a proposal.
so there have been
and
no
we okay it.
proposals?
Not since there was one Habitat for Humanity and there was a big housing development was gonna go in at Swan's Tavern, which fell through. We went on board, town okayed it, but, so it's really lack of viable proposals for us to support.
There was also one for presidential estates, and their other funding fell through. So we've had a couple of times we've tried to fund, and for other reasons, it's fallen through. So
Well-
we would enjoy getting more
Yes.
proposals.
In fact, we are urgently looking for a project. The largest project this committee ever approved was the Swans Tavern. It was about correct me if I'm wrong, but it was about 2.2 million when you count restoration and the purchase and
Around
re...
1.8 altogether.
Well, wasn't there also...
There's 1.5 and then 350.
Okay,
yeah.
1.8. That was the largest project we have. Now, for reasons completely external to this committee, that project fell through. And the presidential courts was also very large, and that one was even approved by town meeting, but it fell through because of external forces. Both of those required state funding to be viable, and our contribution was the local commitment to the project. And so we agreed to recommend that we would fund the local commitment, but then the state did not come through with its side.
Okay.
But we
And
would
we
put that
would
as a
encourage-
priority. We are
We would.
looking for
Okay.
good housing projects. We know we're behind in okaying that, but that's because the projects
They're
haven't
not
done
being
that.
put forward. Okay.
Yeah, we tried twice. And for the public's consumption, I would say if there's some good housing projects that they can bring to us that include subsidized, affordable housing, we would like to get them.
We're particularly interested in smart growth sort of projects that are gonna be good for the town.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about projects that could also have a double purpose of rejuvenating the center, for example, and bringing people into the center. There's a lot of bang for the buck. And one other thing I want to say, because it's been resisted by some people, especially at town meeting. The best way to bring housing of any significance to this town is through a public-private partnership. That is to say, a developer comes to us and says, I will give you this kind of housing, but for me to make it affordable, I need some local help. And, you know, that kind of project has to be looked at very, very carefully. But if it's done well, then you can really leverage the local dollars into significant projects that include subsidized housing. So we would encourage that kind of public-private partnership as well. And there are people in town who would be very suspicious of it, but I would include us among them. We will be suspicious of it, and we will look hard at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
John, if you have the information available, what I think might also be helpful for everyone, you mentioned the balance in the undesignated fund, but could you give the balances?
Yeah, it was
in
3.5. and-
No, but in the other accounts?
Well, the other accounts, yeah, I have them right here. Open space has nothing in it, but that doesn't mean we can't buy open space, because we can dip into the undesignated account. But it was exhausted with the purchase of Glen Echo.
If I could just interject something, the idea is to spend your most restricted funds first, so that's why open space has nothing in it. You spend something that's restricted to only one category as far down as you can, and then you go into the undesignated funds.
This is Barry Castler, by the way. He's the program director. He's a good man to know because he's the one who responds when you have a question. He's been a tremendous value to this committee, and if you're going to work with the committee, you'll be working with Barry mostly, I would say. So in the housing, there is now $596,000. That there have been a couple small housing projects that were approved by the Attorney General, but they've been small. In the
Historic.
historic, I'm looking for it here. Oh, yeah, 415,399, because there've been several historic projects, including the Lucius Clapp Building and even some of the town hall. In fact, that probably is lower now because some of it hasn't been recorded to that. We spent $700,000 historic preservation on the town hall, so I would guess that that is now also zero, but I don't know that for sure. And that's a question of timing. When the bills come in, it gets charged. Before the bills come in, it doesn't get charged. And so the undesignated fund is about $3.6 million. And we dip into that every year because the Open Space Committee, for example, is now zero. So when we pay the debt service on the Glen Echo property, we're dipping into the undesignated fund. The other part you should know is that the funds are being replenished at the rate of about more than $800,000 a year. Our total gross receipts for last year were $800 and something thousand, and we expect that to continue because as more property comes on the tax basis in town and as the assessments go up, we get more money. So we're replenishing the account at $800,000 a year, and in general, we're not spending that much. The total debt service is something on the order of $400,000 a year, and that includes both principal and interest for all of the projects that we have bonded. Any other questions from the public? Please, come on forward. And for the purpose of our audience, please identify yourself.
sure.
We all know who you are.
Thank you, David Leary, 18 Robinette Road. Thank you for letting me talk. On the topic of borrowing again, if you're replenishing at $800,000 per year average now,
Yeah.
and you're already at $400,000 per year in your debt service right now, and if that number becomes upside down, where you're actually getting less cash flow than your actual monthly or annual bond payment, who pays for that kind of situation?
Well, I mean, your hypothetical is unlikely to the point of not happening, but that having been said, it is an obligation of the town. And if there were zero funds in the CPA, the town would have to pick it up.
Does each individual category pay separate? Like if an article came through for historic and there was borrowing in that category, does that category pay a separate bond from the rest of the
The
accounts,
category
or-
pays until it's exhausted, and then it goes into the
Tracked
undesignated.
that way.
I just want to
It's
interject.
tracked,
something.
or is it actually
Yeah, please, track.
encumbered for the bond payments? Each bucket owes its own debt service? Or is
There
the
was a
entire?
yes, there is a separate debt service for each category. What I was going to say is that the last fiscal year, the total debt service, principal and interest was $153,000, not 400, so it's considerably less than what the yearly income is.
So you have to track your ability to pay each debt in each individual bucket, because you can't take from one bucket to help pay for a bond in another bucket. Each
Yes.
bucket has to be sustainable on its own.
Correct.
But couldn't the undesignated be used?
In the undesignated fund, yes.
Which is
Okay.
the majority of the money.
The accounting issues are very complex because it's very
Right.
hard to keep track of all of these things. We've been struggling with it. Every town is struggling with it. But the answer to your question is yes, you allocate it to the category. When the category is exhausted, you go into the undesignated fund.
Right, yeah, it was just a concern because you talked about some funds not having any money left
Yeah.
because you've exhausted it towards whatever spending you did in a certain bucket.
Yeah.
And how would you take care of debt service within a bucket if you,
Well, let me explain. When the statute was adopted, the state wanted to make sure that the money was divided evenly among three categories. But they also said, if you exceed it in other words, we cannot spend the basic money that's put into historic preservation, 10% of it a year. We cannot spend that on anything but historic preservation. So if we don't do anything in historic preservation, that account continues to grow. And we cannot dip into it to cover housing. We cannot dip into it to cover open space. That category is completely committed to housing. And if we die without spending it, it stays in the housing category, and the town will have it to try to find a way to spend it on housing. Now, that doesn't mean that once we've exhausted open space, or once we've exhausted any category, we can't spend more in that category, because we can go into the undesignated fund. But it does mean we cannot dip into housing to fund historic preservation. We can't dip into housing to fund open space.
Is there a ceiling to how far you would bond your articles against the amount that you're replenishing each year? Is there a cap in your
No.
collective, do you have a policy? Do you have a policy that says we'll only borrow up to
No.
a certain amount?
No,
No.
we will make that judgment with respect to each project that comes before us. Of course, the cap is how much we want to spend for any particular project, given all of the other things that are coming before us. We have to assign priorities, and we have to look at value received. And we can say, you know, great idea, but costs too much, we're not going to do that. We're not gonna recommend it.
To address that, there actually is a cap. We're nowhere near it. The cap, the way it works is you bond in anticipation of future income. So your cap is based on how much future income you expect to receive over the life of whatever the bond term is. There are, believe it or not, some towns who are bonded out to maximum capacity. We are nowhere near that.
Now, that's a different
So
question. The
it
question
comes
is,
back to, is there a policy? Are you gonna be like those other towns in which you max out your ability to borrow, or
John?
is it less?
I was just gonna say, it's a constant discussion amongst the committee, and we've got some really good,
That's the
both
answer.
both
That's-
between the.
You don't, yeah,
Yeah.
it's ad hoc
All-
on
but
each
but
one
it's
article.
always,
It's ad
always
hoc.
top of mind.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
yeah, thank you. Any other questions at this public hearing? If not, we're going to adjourn the public hearing and reconvene in an open
John,
business meeting.
can I say one thing? Just
Please.
because we have some members of FinCom here, and we've had some misunderstandings in the past about when we show up or don't show up at a FinCom meeting. And in the past, it's possible that Mr. Hanson got around and rattled people's cages and said, you get to such and such a meeting. I don't think there's any time when we have purposefully missed a FinCom meeting, but that we need to be communicated with clearly that there is a article that we have supported that is coming up at FinCom or the Regulations Committee, communicated clearly to us in advance, and I think we will in good faith try to attend it. I say that simply because I know there's been some bad feeling about us not showing up at meeting X or meeting Y, but for the most part, I think there may have been one meeting where someone didn't go because it indeed wasn't an article that we had approved. But in any case, we did not avoid meetings where there were articles we had approved intentionally. It was simply we didn't know about them or we had conflicts. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to put that out.
As a teaser, you know, every time you on TV, you see them, they end with this teaser. The teaser is when we convene the open meeting, almost immediately after we adjourn this one, we will hear from members of the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen and others on the process that has not really been fully defined. And the town moderator's here also to discuss that. So all of that having been said, any other member of this committee want to say anything before we adjourn the public hearing? A motion is in order to adjourn the
So
public
moved.
hearing.
Second.
Motion made, seconded, all in favor, say aye. A motion is in order to convene the regular business meeting, it being, let's see what time it is. 7:33 and a quorum present. Is there a motion? Motion made, seconded,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
We are now in session in the open meeting. I would like to, because we have people here that are for that, start the meeting with a meeting with the FinCom, municipal regulation, town moderator, and town administrator, to the extent they are here to talk about the procedure for CPC recommendations and warrant articles. When you speak, we ask you to come forward and use these mics, because you don't have to move the mics, but this is being recorded and people won't hear you if you.
I also want to say we have extra copies of the agenda. There's a limited amount. I'd like to first make sure that the rest of the committee has one if they need it.
Has it
Let me
changed? Has-
frame the question, and then we'll open it up for discussion. The statute says that the CPA is absolutely required to first establish a CPA plan, which we have done, establish priorities, and here, receive and vet applications for funding within the categories that are permitted. And our job, I would speak for the whole committee in saying this, we take that job very seriously. We will never flip something to town meeting and say, oh, well, what the heck, let's let that town meeting decide. We will take this, our obligation, very, very seriously. And we will not recommend for CPA funding any projects that we think are not consistent with our priorities, are not properly priced, are not properly positioned, and are not properly supported by an application and some reasonable evidence that they are fulfillable and that they are financeable and that they are a benefit to the town. So, having vetted those things, it often takes several meetings, hours of our time. And we send people back and we say, come back to us with an amended application, and we look very hard at it. Our problem has been that, one other thing, I think the Finance Committee provides an absolutely vital, essential function for this town. I have always respected the recommendations of the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee does just what I said we do to a bunch of projects. But when we come before the Finance Committee, let's say with a positive recommendation, we have weeks sometimes, multiple hours of vetting of that project. And it's very hard for the Finance Committee to understand the depth to which we've gone when we come in with a recommendation. And usually the thing lasts 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and we say we recommend it, and the Finance Committee says one thing or another, and we leave. And I don't know if it's a good use of time for the Finance Committee or for us. So I leave it, I'd love to hear from members of the Finance Committee, I'd love to hear from the town moderator, I'd love to hear from the Board of Selectmen as to what we should do. Without our recommendation, the town meeting can't even discuss CPA funding. With our recommendation, anybody can criticize it, including and maybe even especially the Finance Committee. Go ahead.
If I may, just real quickly, procedurally, so just so we can take up item number 6, I'll make a motion that we table items 2 through 5 to take up item number 6
Okay.
out of order.
That's in order.
Okay.
So the
Second.
motion is made to take it out of order.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And
So,
then, if I may, I'd just
Please.
like to follow up on your comment. And I think, and I've expressed the same concern that you just shared with several folks who are here tonight. You mentioned the fact that the CPC does not petition articles. We, much like the Finance Committee does, we make a recommendation to town meeting whether to approve an application that comes before us. So I think part of the problem has been this interplay between our role in making a recommendation when an application comes before us and the role of the Finance Committee. And as you said, I know from watching some of the meetings on television, on occasion, members of the Finance Committee have expressed some frustration because there's not a member of the Community Preservation Committee at a hearing of the Finance Committee when we are not the petitioners, number one. And then secondly, I'm not quite sure, well, I have my opinion, but I think the issue is, what is the role of the Finance Committee when it's an application for funding that comes before the Community Preservation Committee? So I think, and I was glad, and Adam and I have discussed this, I was glad to see that he was available to come tonight. We've talked about this offline, if you will, but I think this is an issue that has caused some degree of consternation between some folks, and I think it's important, and I'm glad to see that there are members of the Finance Committee here tonight as well, members of the Board of Selectmen, so that hopefully, if nothing else happens tonight, we can walk out of this meeting tonight with a clearer understanding, if not a final agreement, on just what the roles are as it relates to applications that come before us that get inserted into the warrant for a town meeting, so that going forward, and starting hopefully with the 2019 annual town meeting, we'll all be on the same page as it relates to that process.
Yeah. Well, one quick comment, and then we'll take your comment. If the Finance Committee is really trying to vet the project, then the appropriate person before the Finance Committee should be the petitioner. And the CPC is not the petitioner. We are a recommending body. All we can do is say, well, we heard it and we decided that it was meritorious, or we decided it wasn't meritorious, and we voted to support it. But the petitioner is the one who really has the stake. They are the ones who have the facts and so on. We have heard the facts over a long period of time, but we are not the petitioner. Did you have a comment again?
Yeah, I
Please.
just have a question. Thank you, Dave Lurie, 18 Robinette Road. Just, I think before getting deep into any conversation at all on it, I think it's important to just know if this is considered, CPC is considered a standing committee by town meeting. Is this a recognized
I think it
standing
is not.
committee?
It's a
That-
statutory committee. I think it is not.
It's not a standing committee,
In
because
fact,
that
we have an
answers,
opinion to that effect because under our charter, you cannot be a member of two standing committees. And early on, since everybody here comes from, many people here come from standing committees, including me, Conservation Commission, it would be a violation of the charter for me to be on this if it were a standing committee. Therefore, we sought and received an opinion of council saying this is not a standing committee created under the charter. It's a committee created by state statute.
right, if you want, I can share some information if you're interested. I went to the charter to see how the process is recognized in terms of what must happen.
Right.
What must happen, it says in, I don't know how to read the things on the, the language you use legally, C714, the town meeting standing committee, and then there's a paragraph A, and it says, there shall be a town meeting committee on rules consisting of the moderator, who shall be chairman, the deputy moderator ex officio, and each precinct chairman. All warrant articles shall first be referred to the Committee on Rules, which shall subsequently refer to the article to the appropriate standing committee or committees for public hearing and recommendation to the town meeting for action on the floor. No floor action may be taken at town meetings without a public hearing and a standing committee report on the article. So it doesn't matter, I'm not saying Finance Committee. A standing committee that's decided by the Rules Committee must happen. Before it gets to the floor, somebody other than yours, unless you're a standing committee, some standing committee needs to write a report. I just wanted to
And
share.
I have no objection to that. I would just say, who is the standing committee required to vet? It's not this committee, it's the petitioner. And so if you want someone to come before the Finance Committee, invite the petitioner, yes, please.
So, on the process, first, I agree, the petitioner needs to be there, and it's a problem when they're not. But I would say both when this committee, your committee, has made a recommendation in favor or against a petitioner that relates to the CPC funding, I think it would be, I found it to be a problem when somebody is not there, because it would be immensely helpful to us, since you've put in all of that time, whether you've recommended for or against, and you've vetted it thoroughly, for us to be able to benefit from what you've learned from that process and why you've made the decision you've made. And we often don't know that thinking or what the decision is. So especially in the case when you've recommended against something, if it's still something coming before us where we might have to use some other type of funding from the town, we'll want to know why you thought it was a bad idea. because, you know, we want to take that into consideration before we decide to use other funds for that purpose. So I would like to see a process that includes not just a petitioner, but a member of the CPC present whenever the CPC funding is at play.
It's a good comment, and I think we have to take it into account. Yes, go ahead.
And if I may, through you, John, I think we could do something like that when we have the luxury of time between when we hold our hearings on an article and when you folks are holding your hearings.
Right.
Oftentimes, particularly over the last year or two, those times have overlapped.
Yep.
And right up until, and I'm thinking of a couple of years ago with the train station, right up until, was it the night before town meeting we were meeting?
Yes.
And finalizing our recommendation. And so that part of the process makes it difficult to do that. But, you know, to the extent that we can make our recommendations known to you folks, it's no different than the other standing committees, as Mr. Loring alluded to, making their recommendation. Sometimes you get them in time, sometimes we don't get them until the book comes out, sometimes we don't get them after the book comes out.
That's right.
You know, so it's all part of that timing function, which, you know, hopefully we can improve upon it. To some extent, we've been our own worst enemy, because we've allowed applications to come in late. We haven't held true to our own deadlines. Generally speaking, we've done so in the interest of the particular petitioner, to try to give an article an opportunity to be heard at whatever that next town meeting is, instead of having to wait an entire cycle again. And that's part of our discussion you'll see on our agenda, and an issue that we've been struggling with, and hopefully we'll be tightening those regulations up internally. But, you know, the point is well taken.
Yeah.
But could I just add to that through you?
Yeah, please.
Mrs. Moore? I just wanted to say that on some of those projects, we didn't even have the information. And so we couldn't sit there and tell you about a project because we hadn't even heard it, or we hadn't had a chance to vet it. So we didn't have a decision one way or the other. And that's frustrating for us.
Any member of the Board of Selectmen or would the town moderator like to make some comments on this? We need guidance. We'd appreciate your comments.
Good evening, I'm Adam Dawkins, Town Moderator. This special town meeting revealed some holes for us, and part of that, some of that was owing to the very, very tight timeline we were on for this particular town meeting. Some of this simply revealed some organizational issues that exist in our system that need to be addressed, and between me and between the staff at Town Hall, who support me and support the workings of the Rules Committee and the preparations for town meeting, to a great extent, need to tighten up some communications clearly. And so one of the things I would recommend is when the warrant is closed and is then handed to the Rules Committee or handed to me in order to convene the Rules Committee, the Rules Committee then, as Mr. Lurie said a moment ago, makes recommendations for every article, makes recommendations to which standing committee, and we now know that standing committees do not include the CPC or the CPC, which standing committees should have hearings on every particular article. So when the Rules Committee make their judgment, and by the way, may I just say, the Rules Committee had made some recommendations in this particular cycle for the special town meeting, having to do with, say, zoning articles and other articles to the Finance Committee that were not. Some of those recommendations were not adopted universally they were majority votes, but were not unanimous votes for the passing along to the Finance Committee of zoning articles, for instance, and so those things were not universally agreed upon. clearly what's missing is a communication that goes out to the chairs of all the standing committees and to the CPC of what the actions of the Rules Committee have been, why they've made these decisions. So when the Rules Committee says, we recommend that this particular article be heard by the Finance Committee, some semblance as to why that is might be useful to them, so that then we are able to sort of communicate among ourselves more a bit more effectively than simply to wonder why the Rules Committee has decided the way they have in order to pass any particular article along to a standing committee. So that is something that we will develop in time for the annual. That is a process that we will tighten up. I've heard the comments loud and clear about this, and we will address this in time for the annual town meeting.
Do you have an opinion as to whether the recommendations or any matter recommended or not recommended by this committee should go to the Finance Committee?
Well, in my own opinion, I think if it's a matter that is to be funded through CPC funding, should be a matter that should be recommended by this body, by the CPC. That would be my. But again, it's the Rules Committee that ultimately decides that, and I am one vote on the Rules Committee. So the Rules Committee may decide otherwise and put that in front of the Finance Committee, in which case that communication that I mentioned a moment ago, a memorandum or something that goes to all the chairs of the various standing committees and of bodies such as this one, would have some idea that A, this has been recommended to the Finance Committee, and this is why in particular they've decided to do that. So that gives you some idea as to what they're going to be talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment, Mr.?
Bob O'Regan,
Bob
Precinct 1 Town Meeting and Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. I think it would be inappropriate for the Board of Selectmen to weigh in on how town meeting should govern itself. Our function is to prepare the warrant. With respect to town meeting, I think that organizationally, one of the challenges is to line up who should be at meetings of the Finance Committee to speak on articles. I think, and we've talked about this a little bit with the new staff about notifications, timing of meetings, support materials, and things like that. So it's not that we don't see a role for the Board of Selectmen, it's just that the role would, in my own view, is that the role does not get into telling any part of town meeting how it should or should not run, because that's frankly not our turf. And to make sure that if we get a request on how to help them or you do your jobs better, we do our best to assist in any way that we can, and we would like to do that. One of the challenges, frankly, is on any of the meetings of the standing committees, just getting the notices out, for example, to petitioners who petition articles to us. My understanding is that other than an ad in the Penny Saver, and maybe somebody who goes to town hall and reads the postings on the wall, if you happen to be a petitioner, and there are some people here who are petitioning for activity, they don't get notified, they don't get requested by the Committee on Finance and Taxation or town meeting as to when the meetings are. My understanding is for that reason, some of them miss the meeting because they don't know that they should be there, or what would be expected of them. I think, we and town hall staff would like to assist them, but again, what our role would be in doing that needs to be defined, because I would be very wary of any perception that the Board of Selectmen or town administration was in any way participating in the function of these committees other than providing information and making sure people know about it.
And I would add on to what Mr. O'Regan said by saying that I do not believe that it is appropriate for the moderator to be intimately involved in the workings of the standing committees once those committees are organized and are doing their business. So in other words, if a standing committee has to cancel a meeting or has to move a meeting, it should be the function of that standing committee's chair to make sure that the committee has been communicated with, and that any petitioners who may be scheduled to appear before that particular committee at any particular time have been communicated with as well. And that has been a hole in the system as well, that there's been confusion as to who is responsible for that. My predecessor did things his way. A new moderator does things. I do things my way. My successor will do things his or her way. I think that it's more appropriate for the chairs of the standing committees to be the person who is the point person to govern their committee as they see fit. It is my role to chair the town meeting. It is not my role to chair the standing committees.
And apropos to that, just to connect this, how it affects how we work at the Board of Selectmen or the town government. The charter requires reports from standing committees of town meeting. It's not an option. And as happens sometimes, either there can be no one showing up to speak. Part of the problem is some people don't know, or there was no quorum of the committee to report, so there's no report made. Now, I can tell you, without getting into any detail, that that particular issue can cause serious problems on whether action voted by town meeting can be recognized by people outside of town because of a failure to comply. And we have such an issue arising from the last special town meeting when one of the standing committee reported they had no recommendation because they failed to assemble a quorum. And the question by me was, not at the town meeting, but the question by me was, well, why wasn't it renoticed? Why wasn't, we need to do better if there's no quorum to assemble and get one, because there are consequences for not doing it besides the committee saying we couldn't report. And we may run into one of those shortly if we can't work our way around it.
Well, I also though noticed that even the finance committee often doesn't make a recommendation. It says refer to town meeting. So, I mean, it has been before the committee, but the committee is not required to make a recommendation. And so if the CPC articles were treated that way, it would still conform to the charter. I have no problem going before the finance committee, no problem at all. I just don't know what is accomplished by doing it, since so much time is spent by this committee and so little time and so little information can be made available to the finance committee. But as I said at the beginning, and I'll repeat now, I think the finance committee performs a vital function, and I respect it, and you know, I have no problem, speaking for myself, of having this committee go before them. Go ahead.
And John, the other thing I'd like to add to what was said by both gentlemen is, certainly think, particularly if it's a petitioned article that's being assigned to some standing committee that is then going to hold a public hearing, whether it's the joint public hearings that have been utilized over the last several years or an individual standing committee, there should be a mechanism to notify the petitioner of that hearing. But I think some of the frustration by the folks up here at this table is we are never the petitioner. So although we'd be happy to pass on our recommendation, I think, to any standing committee, whether it's the finance committee or anybody, it's never this committee that's going to be the petitioner, no more than it would be the finance committee to be the petitioner. We receive applications, we make recommendations to town meeting, but we're not the petitioner. So, but in terms of the issue of petitioners not getting notified of when a standing committee may be holding a hearing, and for those that don't perhaps read the penny saver as religiously as some folks do, there should be some kind of a mechanism to notify the petitioner when that hearing is going to be held.
And
But-
Mr. Chairman, that's a valid point, because the Board of Selectmen is asked to and has inserted articles at the request of other than governmental bodies. So anyone in town can request a petition, an article to be inserted. In fact, we just received a request from someone with an interest in property to put a warrant article to change zoning for on an area for the Springtown meeting. That's not our article. If it comes to us with a recommendation or in a draft, that I could see the Board of Selectmen inserting it. It would, I think, be incumbent on the committee to notify that petitioner to be there, because neither we nor the town would be the sponsor of that article. So that's one step that we have in common about getting the word out. But what we should try to do is help with staffing that, because that's what we do.
Well,
I don't wanna- Can I comment?
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to say that also, some projects they anticipate to put before us, and they haven't met with us in whatever the date is for the warrant to be cut off, the date for the warrant articles, and so they put in what they call placeholders, in which they will put, an article in for something that they anticipate presenting to us, but they have not done so at that time. And so that is also problematic for us in terms of FinCom wanting to know what's what. I don't know whether that should be allowed, but I guess it is.
And if I may, that speaks to some of the issues of timing on our charter. We close our warrant much earlier than many other communities do, way earlier than most. Why we do that, how we do that, but we do. And so one of the problems is if the work isn't ready to put it in, the question is, well, do we lose an opportunity by not having it? Or do we
Exactly.
save an opportunity and put it in hope that we can knit everything together? And the dynamic that creates is, of course, people are getting ready for what's in the warrant, and they're hoping not to wait a year or lose the opportunity, because in the case
Right.
of real estate transactions, people do not wait a year and a half to sell a piece of property.
Right, understood,
And
understood.
so I think a smaller group, if we can put it together to
And
work
then
on
what they
these,
do is
would be
dismiss
good.
it at town meeting if they just weren't able to
That's right.
get it done on time.
Or they blame us for not maintaining our deadlines,
Yeah.
when the deadlines are almost, by definition, unrealistic, given what you just said about the
I
timing
want to
it has
speak to
have.
that for a minute, because that's an important point. Our plan that's on record says you should file before December 31. In fact, you should file in November at the latest
For the annual.
for the
annual,
annual town meeting. That's what we try to observe, but we're all on the same team. I mean, this is a one town, it's taxpayers' money. If an opportunity comes up in November or December that's time constrained, I think it would be improper for this committee to say, oh, sorry, you missed the deadline, we're not even gonna talk about that opportunity. So in those cases, we find ourselves having to confront a placeholder that's put in the warrant. And if it is really a time-constrained article, speaking for the committee, we have often agreed to hear it. And as Mr. Crimmins has pointed out, we in one case met the night before the town meeting to finalize a recommendation, because the item was time constrained, because we thought it was in the best interest of the town to hear it. And we were not going to dismiss it based on the timing issue. And so if we had gone, well, we did go to the finance committee that year and say, we don't know. And we really got hammered for having an article in the warrant that we knew nothing about. But I had to say, we know nothing about this article. We didn't put it in, but we are willing to hear it. And we find ourselves in that position. And I will say publicly, if you have a time-constrained article, and the burden is on you to prove it to us that it's time-constrained, and it comes in at the last minute, we're not gonna throw you out. But other than that, if it's not time-constrained, we want it in November or early December at the latest, so we can make a recommendation for the annual town meeting.
And I would just like to add to that, John, if I may, and I think, once again, the recent special town meeting illustrated this. As difficult as those timeframes are for the annual town meeting, they are especially so for a special. And although, as has been said, we cannot prevent somebody from finding, once the selectmen open the warrant for a special, whether they choose to insert an article or there's a petition article, this committee cannot control that. But it does put us under an even bigger gun to try to meet the time periods. And so I guess I'm just throwing it out there for everyone's consideration. The specials are particularly difficult as it relates to articles that would come to this committee. I know they're difficult for all of the committees dealing with them, but they make it especially difficult for us to deal with an article and to vet an article properly and to do all the things that you've alluded to, John, that we do within the time restrictions of a special. It makes it next to impossible.
I think that's correct. And if there are no other comments, we'll move on to the next item, but there are some more. Please, come forward.
Thanks,
Hi, Glenn Tucker, Precinct 8. So also I have to tell you that technically I am not chair of municipal regulations because for the meeting for the special one, I was late to it, and in order to start the business, they elected Stephanie as chair of municipal regulations. However, she didn't want the job then, but she agreed to take it because somebody had to. And she said that she is, of course, interested in what happens here at this meeting, but she did not want to come and asked me to come, and I'm just telling you that technically I'm not that person, but as soon as she can, she's getting rid of that chairship there. So, oh, and she's here. Oh, I'm sorry, she is here. Okay. Okay, sorry. I had several thoughts here. I mean, Mr. O'Regan and Mr. Dawkins are very nice and feel like they can't speak to how other committees should operate, but I'll toss some things toward FinCom for all of them who are here. And just the question that came up about, when should FinCom, require, CPC presence at any of their meetings. And, I think that it's, to everyone's credit, this committee, FinCom's credit, everyone's credit, everyone wants to, like you said, John, everyone's trying to do what is best for the town. We're trying to be fair. We're trying to be reasonable. And if you draw hard rules and stick to them and don't allow any exceptions, you're being unreasonable. But if you don't have any, that's also unreasonable. So it's all of these things involve judgment, and people have opinions about it, and reasonable people will always disagree about this. But I think that you're to be applauded for recognizing that we're all trying to do the right thing, and we all want to be fair and reasonable about things. But when it comes to when FinCom, when someone from CPC should go to FinCom, my thought was, just sitting here listening to this, was, well, when there's a potential or real, significant impact on the budget. What's potential and what's significant? Well, that's open for interpretation. I think if it's a smaller expenditure, and again, if you try to draw a hard line, like on a dollar amount, you're going to find 100 exceptions immediately. But I think that if it was a smaller amount that seemed that, in your judgment, was unlikely or certainly did not have a large effect on the budget at all, well, why would we bother them? They have enough work to do.
But you understand that we operate outside of the municipal.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's still taxpayers' money. No
Right,
question.
it's still taxpayers' money, but in some cases there are things that it would be a combination of. CPC would provide this, funds for this project for this purpose, and there's another part of it that funds would have to come from elsewhere. Well, that's something that clearly has, potential impact on the budget, and there should be collaboration there for those things. But again, when it's something that's small and probably not, well, you're busy and so are they. But again, you'll always find someone who can disagree with that. But I think that, using the fair and reasonable sort of criteria is a good way to go. Let's always try to use common sense, because so much of what we do and that, well, except for Barry and Joe, everybody else uses common sense, but they're lawyers, so they so they don't have to. But,
We'll strike those.
One for the medical community.
okay. So that was my thought, with that. Let's all try to be, again, use good judgment and to keep it above board, which brings me to my second main comment and why I brought this up when I was at the last committee. I came to talk about something else, but I was sitting there listening to all this, and I'm like, well, nobody has any idea what anybody else is doing around here. And I think that, precipitated some of these discussions, at least I hope so. And again, it's not a criticism of anyone. It was more just an observation that something isn't working right. And so it seems to me that a lot of this comes down to just effective communication with everyone about what's going on. I know when we did our minutes for our meetings and going back and looking at it, I was there, I participated in the discussion, I was quoted in some of them there, but it was hard for me to sort of reconstruct what exactly was it we were discussing there, what were the issues, kind of thing. And I think that it's a challenge for any kind of committee work anywhere, whether it's government or private or business or anything, to be able to communicate effectively with another group. What were the real issues that we discussed? What was the decision, and is there a rationale? Now that can be very concise or it can be really long, but it's one of those things that, like when it comes up at, whether it's FinCom or something, your committee and ours has a joint kind of thing that we're looking at, it's helpful to know those things, that CPC, these were their thoughts on this, not just the end recommendation. Yeah. But again, these are things that are difficult to manage because it takes time to sort of record these things, unless you have someone like Barry there who's frantically writing everything down that everyone's saying.
His
here.
minutes are incredible.
Yeah.
And just to touch on what Dr.
Identify yourself
I'm
for the
sorry,
public.
Stephanie Carrara, Precinct 2, temporary chair of the municipal regs. And just to touch on what Dr. Tucker was saying, it was that we had what we thought was an important article. It was a very sensitive article about the survey on the property on Pleasant Street. And you guys, this board recommended it, which was fine, but we had questions and we didn't have anything to go by. So we voted against it, but with the caveat that there was no one there from CPC for us to ask questions. And I think that, in a nutshell, what everyone is saying is, yes, the communication needs to be better, but on an important issue like that, and for me, I grew up in that neighborhood, I don't live there anymore, but I still care about it, I have family and friends there. I just think that everyone kind of knew about that, and I was just hoping that there was someone from the board or a report that we could go by to make an accurate vote to allow it to go forward. And we couldn't do that. So that's just my take on, the situation.
Can you tell me if that article was before both the Finance Committee and the Municipal Regulations Committee?
I believe it was,
yeah.
but I
Excuse me, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, everyone's kind of like, whoa, what's going on? But for me, and Dr. Tucker and I, we were both going back and forth, and our committee decided that we had to vote against it because we had questions for this board, but we couldn't ask. We understand that you're not the petitioner. but there was, nobody was there, so we couldn't make an accurate vote. And I think in order for.
Why would we need to be there for you to take a vote, Steph?
Well, we wanted to ask you guys questions, or a member of the board questions, and we couldn't ask our questions because no one was there, it was just our committee. We didn't have any, like, you know, what
But
you're.
why wouldn't it be the petitioner that you'd be
No,
looking to
I'm-
ask the questions?
We
to?
had CPC questions. And I can't
I
remember what
can't
they
even
were.
remember what they were.
To be honest with you,
Okay.
exactly, you know, in annual, a special town
I
meeting.
guess I'm trying to analogize, it would be like saying to
We just had a couple of questions that
Eddie
we wanted.
Trumfield, come to our meeting, because we have
No.
questions of the finance committee.
Well, we had specific questions with this particular article
Mhm.
that was towards this group.
Okay.
Right now, I just can't remember what
Okay.
they
No,
were.
I understand.
So, but we had like no, like, you know, like, we voted, you know, I'm
Mm.
saying from you guys, like, we voted for, to put this forward, it came before us.
Mhm.
Well, just like a little synopsis, like, or a brief paragraph of a minute of your,
And I think part of the problem, if memory serves me, is we were meeting downstairs on the first floor at the same time that you folks were
Yeah.
upstairs.
And we,
So-
and I don't think our
Let
group
me,
did
let me,
that.
let me just interject something. If we had come to your meeting, we would have said something like, we heard them, we knew, we think that the piece of land, because it connects to the Dawes School and the Cape and Reynolds, and it's 11 acres, and it has trails on it, and the neighbors have committed to make a substantial contribution to the purchase, has enough merit to take the first step. The first step is, we cannot act without an appraisal. If somebody comes in and says $1 million for the property, we say, forget it. We need to know what the value
Correct.
is. And so the first step is to get an appraisal and a commitment of the owner to sell at that price or less. That decision was made by this committee based on the feeling that there is enough merit to preserving that property. Not that we will do it, but
Correct.
there is enough merit to go the next step to find out what it's worth and whether the owner will sell it for that price. And then come to us with a willing seller and a fixed price, and we can make a judgment.
And that's great, but we didn't really know anything, and other members of the board had a couple of questions for CPC.
Well, but the petitioner knew all of that because he was
Correct,
before us.
and I understand that, but he's not on your board.
Well,
And we
he
had
should be.
questions
I guess
for
that's
your
what we're
board.
saying. He should
Do you
be.
know what I mean? We, as I said at the town meeting the other night, the owner of the property wasn't there. And although a person was speaking, Mr. Zemanian and Precinct 1 was speaking, I asked that question, like, I'm a cynic, and I said, you know, you're talking about this person's property, but you're not the owner. Are you in contact? Like, I had questions like that, and he answered them for me at town meeting, which was great. But we specifically, and Dr. Tucker can attest to it, we had questions for your board.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, John, I can't remember what they were right now.
Well, let me just say,
That's
because
a little
we've got a lot of
disturbing.
people
Yeah.
here that want to get going on other things. I respect your opinions very much, and I think everyone here does. We are now more aware of your problems, and I hope you're more aware of ours.
Correct.
Everybody here goes to a bazillion meetings a year for conservation, planning board, housing authority, historical commission, recreation department. I mean, we really go to meetings. It's not something it's in the job description and we'll do it, but if we can add something of value, we will do it. We're just not the petitioners in most
I
cases.
think, and if I may, John, not to cut you, I think part of the problem was just that, and I think, you know, the way the book is produced and indicate who the petitioner is, you know, I think we've got to get that down, you know, and it shouldn't be us, it shouldn't be
Right.
listed as us, so, you know, that's number one. Who the article gets assigned to is another issue. in that whole process. And then, again, at the risk of being redundant, you know, some of these articles that caused a special town meeting to get called, it caused us to have a meeting the same night that the finance committee was meeting. So it just made it, you know, even if, you know, I don't think any of us would have an objection to go into a meeting if we were requested to come up to make a presentation, but that had not been communicated to us. We were not the petitioner, so, you know, where that problem lies, I don't think is all
Yeah,
that
if I
important.
can, the one communication was the chairman of FinCom put his head in our door before most of us were there, but talked to me and said, if you pass the state theater thing, please come up and let us know. That was the communication we got about what FinCom needed to know if we would have passed that. So we didn't pass it, and there was nothing else about anything else communicated to us, even that informally at that time.
Out of respect for others who are here on other projects, I'd like to move this thing along. So if there's anybody with anything new to say,
I do.
We would welcome your comments. Otherwise,
I do.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so we can come out of this with something concrete. I've heard a lot of good stuff, and I understand the committee members are busy, and they can't go to every single meeting in town. But I'd like to ask, would it be helpful when we do recommend favorably on a project to send something written to FinCom, municipal regs?
To me, even if you sent it to the moderator, so he had it, and then when he got out, said what groups had to meet, he could say, this is what I got.
And
well, I think this suggestion is a good one, and I think we can adopt that as a part of the practice. I also have no objection coming to the meetings, but I can tell you that there's not much we can say, except that either we recommended or we didn't.
can I just add one other thing that, I don't know that this is helpful or not, but if you wrote down questions that you had and sent them to us through John, or, well, probably through Barry, I don't know whether that would be helpful or not, so that then we'd know what your questions were and someone could address them.
Yeah. So it's actually, I'll talk fast, John, and then I'll be quiet. I think that what I spoke about at the last meeting that I was at was, my idea was that if we can encourage cooperation among the standing committees and CPC, between everyone and the standing committees and CPC, because you guys aren't part of that, I think that's one of the things that would be helpful to everyone. I mean, we'd have better understanding of where some of these things are coming from, maybe some of the concerns you have about some of the things coming up when you're going through your vetting, to, you know, maybe you could hand it off to somebody else to say, you know, we like this idea, but there's a lot of things that we would need to address about it, and maybe that could be sort of handed off, and we could, you know, work cooperatively on some of these things. There's that, and then also I do have an idea which I will discuss with Adam and Bob O'Regan about how to help facilitate some of this communication and the minutes and what was discussed and that, and it includes distribution and things like that, which I'll
We
get back to
will
that.
communicate more publicly, and we will do our best to attend meetings. Often, as you know, we meet at the same time they're
Right.
meeting and we can't. But I thank everybody for their comments. This has been very good.
So I just want, real, but Glenn, the problem is we can't hand things off. We have to act on our applications that come before us. So
Right.
That's really, I appreciate the suggestion, but realistically, it's really not an option for us. We
Well,
have to act
well,
on the
Barry,
application. And that's
what
why
I'm
we go
suggest-
through a quite lengthy, as you know, vetting process on the applications that do come before us.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that when you notice that there are problems with things that could be addressed or require other adjustments in whether it's a town.
There are
bylaws
problems.
No
or-
problems were
applicant.
brought to our attention is along the lines of what you and Stephanie are referring to tonight.
I understand that, Barry. I'm talking about trying to improve cooperation and helpfulness
We're all
among
for that.
everybody.
I think everyone's for that.
Because we can sit and talk about what happened, you know, forever, but looking at going forward to having things.
I absolutely agree that we need more communications among the committees. But I guess I'm going to have to ask that we get on with our
Yes,
agenda, because
absolutely.
we've got a lot to do tonight. And thank you for your comments. Oh, Joe, did you want to say something? Thank you. Thank you for coming in. I recognize that those of you who have been speaking are also going to a lot of meetings and doing a lot for the town, and you have my personal gratitude for the time you spend and the things you do. I think it's terrific. And this town won't work without you, so thank you for what you do. That having been said, we've got a couple of administrative things I'd like to put off. I'm not going to do a chairman's report because I've been reporting too much tonight, and you don't want to hear me talk anymore. The administrator's report, I'd like you to keep it very brief if you could, but there's some important things in the administrator's report.
Okay, I'd just like to review what's been going on with the projects that the CPC had recommended favorably on and were approved by town meeting. First, the Town Hall cupola project is now complete. It came in under budget. That was just approved in May. The West School Playground Improvements, Phase 1, Design Services, that's still in process. The second phase of the project, which is the actual construction, will be coming before this committee at its next meeting, probably in January. The Novello Field backstop, which is in that complex, was a smaller project to replace the backstop, and that is now complete in time for the next baseball season. And that's it.
Thank you, thank you. Any other comments on those projects? All right, that having been said, the next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. We went through that at the open meeting. Everybody here was here to hear that, so we won't do that again. The next item on the agenda is review disposition of CPA-related fall town meeting articles. And under that category comes, which one are we picking up?
Number 5.
Number 5.
I'll review the disposition of the articles, sorry.
I mean, is there something that I should call on that one? State Theater Golf Course?
Oh, this one is.
But isn't my understanding
Number 5
that
was where.
The appraisal
was
did
going to
pass
school.
at town
Was
meeting,
what?
correct?
Yes.
The appraisal did pass.
So that's, we should mention that.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything to discuss under that article? That's what I'm asking. Under Article 5.
Well,
John, I do
Yeah,
have a
I
point.
think several of us have some questions there.
I'll let Mr. Crimmins
No,
go first.
go ahead, Joe.
What's the next step? Are we, with respect to the appraisal on that property?
Well,
Who's gonna gauge the appraiser and who's?
Are we talking Pleasant Street now? Are we talking?
Well, that's a disposed of article in town.
You're talking about the Hanson property?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, and the next step is that somebody has to get an appraisal. Well, I guess the town manager, because it's a town appraisal. So that,
May I?
yes, go ahead. I mean, let me
I just wanna
be
make sure
very-
there was no,
Let
my
me be
purpose in
very
the question,
clear.
Mr. Moore.
We recommended the funding to town meeting. Town meeting approved the funding. It is now a municipal responsibility, and the appraisal has to be directed to the town, not, it has to be directed to the town. And so the town
Understood.
will pay for it, and somebody has to get it started, and that is now in the hands of the selectmen and the town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Semanian, Precinct 1 Town Meeting Representative, also the petitioner of this article. So this was all very interesting, what you were speaking about at the prior item, number 6. I did have some questions to this, and you're starting to fill in the blanks. So as the petitioner, we have approval for the appraisal. So the next step should be for me to either go to the town manager or through the Board of Selectmen?
I understand
Being a
this.
civilian when we started this?
You don't, I mean, respectfully, I'm saying
Oh,
this
no,
very
no,
respectfully.
I want to know how this works, so.
I understand. You don't have the authority to do an appraisal. The
No.
town has the authority
Correct.
to do an appraisal. Your job is to kick people and say,
Well, that's who I need to know who I kick. Is it gonna be the poor chairman of the board here, or, I mean, who should I approach next? I guess
the
that's the question.
responsibility is now with the town manager and the board of selectmen.
Okay.
Well, I know you have some comments, so I can, you can go next.
And is there going to be somebody either from the CPC or open space to oversee that appraisal process?
We will, the only obligation we have is to assure that the money that was allocated to an appraisal is used for that purpose and no other purpose. So if you want to take that trip to Miami with the money to see about an appraiser,
Don't.
we're going to stop you.
I have no interest in that. But what I am asking for is it, oh, I'm sorry,
No, go
did
ahead,
you?
Mark.
Is there somebody representative from either the CPC or Open Space willing to oversee the process so
Well, the
that
answer
the
is
steps
yes,
can be
and-
assured?
And our program administrator will basically, are our eyes and ears, and he will report back to this committee, and, you know, we will follow through.
Okay.
But that
Yes,
implies
go
the
ahead.
appraiser will then.
We have a comment?
Yeah, if I may. So I think we have, the questions that Mr. Zemanian are asking are very important as it relates to Article 8 approved at the special town meeting. The bigger question, however, is if and when that appraisal comes in, and if and when a decision is made to go forward, we need to act on an application at some point. Let's say that appraisal comes in the next month. You know, comes in January. So now it begs the question, what happens next? And then we have the same issue there that we had with the theater project, which is if it's going to be, as everyone here knows, and some people in the audience know, but maybe not everyone, if it's going to be a purchase of real estate using CPA funds, the town has to be the purchaser.
That's
So we've got that issue. Is there going to be an application submitted by the town to purchase the property? And then that also begs the question, is there an agreement with the property owner to sell the property? So, yes, we have the immediate issue that was addressed at the special town meeting, but we have some bigger questions beyond that.
Yeah, we do. I mean, first of all, the petitioner, any citizen with the appropriate signatures can put an article in the warrant saying, we want the town to buy this property. In other words, the selectmen don't have to be the sole source of that article.
Correct.
However, if you're gonna be the sole source of it, you need 10 signatures, I think, for the annual meeting, and it gotta go in before the warrant closes and so on. That having been said, the article and the motion on the floor has to be that the town will buy it. But you, as a petitioner, can put in an article saying that the town will buy it. The town meeting may or may not approve that, this committee may or may not agree to fund it, but you can put the article in, and it would be your responsibility to do that. The second thing is, you have to come to us with not just an appraisal, but with some indication that the seller will sell for that much or less. And
So
there's,
I could answer a couple of those questions briefly. Firstly, we'll address what you just said. The
Yeah.
seller is interested in signing a P&S with this board. Unfortunately, we needed the appraisal first. So we come back to the critical part of this, which is the appraisal. I will contact the town manager and the board of selectmen to work with them to try and spurn that along as quickly as possible. I know that the chairman of the board at the meeting when we made our application, when we brought our application to you in September, had stated that if we were able to do things the way we did, that it could be expedited by the town through the Board of Selectmen, whereas things could be more complicated. Now, I may not have the wording exactly right, so I'm ad-libbing a bit, but the gist was the chair seemed willing to help the
okay,
community.
here's my advice to you. Be prepared to respond very, very quickly.
We are
Because
prepared.
the time is going to be very tight.
Absolutely. We're aware
And
of
that-
this.
What that means is, you should be preparing an application. It's a whole new issue.
Okay, so the application that we originally put in is no longer,
Well, the application.
because remember, we
originally
put in an application to
Yes, but it
purchase.
didn't have a price, it didn't have a
We
willing
did.
seller.
It did have a price.
Well, it was $1 million.
It was,
Well, I mean,
yes,
but
but
that's
it had a price. That price was dictated by the owner of the property,
Well, but that's irrelevant to us. What's relevant to us is.
which
what's
is why we went to the
appraiser-
appraisal, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
understood that, yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, no, you're going to have an application that says you have a willing seller at the appraised value, and here is the appraised value, and so on. The appraisal will go to the town, it'll be commissioned by the town.
Right, so we're back to the appraisal.
And we're back to.
So this seems like we're in a bit of I'm running a marathon just after I ran a
We are,
marathon.
but that's not our fault.
And, no, I'm not trying to place blame, it just,
Yeah.
trying to understand that this isn't a process that we've done or do every day. So we're gonna rely on your expertise, being a board that does see this on at least more regular basis than we do personally.
And we're from the government and we're here to help.
Yeah, that scares me.
I have a procedural question. The application for the purchase will technically have to be signed and come from the town, the Board of Selectmen.
That's correct.
The town manager.
Well, no, it doesn't have to. I mean, because any citizen can put an article in the warrant.
No, I'm talking about the application for this committee to fund it.
I don't think so.
Well, in all due respect, we came to the CPC because we wanted the support of the town for this. So I don't know that petitioning it is.
The application comes from the petitioner, and the petitioner is petitioning for the town to buy. If the Board of Selectmen were to send this committee a letter saying, we think this is a lousy idea, please don't do it, we would take that into account
Of
in
course.
making our decision. But no one can stop you from putting an article in that say, the town should buy the town of Avon. I mean, what the heck? Put
Well,
in
I'm
the
not sure I
article.
wanna do
I mean,
that,
We're
but-
probably not gonna do it, you know?
No. So we will begin the process of working with the Board of Selectmen and Town Manager, as you've suggested. Do you want to hear some of our other thoughts on, so one of the things that I heard at town meeting pretty clearly from the representatives was that they would like the community to have some skin in the game, if you will. I don't really like that wording, but an investment of sorts. So we've done a couple of things. We've begun the process of setting up a 501(c) nonprofit so that we can take in donations that can be funneled back to the CPC.
I'd like to respectfully say that
Yeah.
that's gonna be something that comes up when we get to buying it. I can tell you for certain that this committee gives favor to those programs
And we recognize
that
that.
have other sources of funds.
Yep.
And, but we don't, I respectfully wouldn't want to take the time of this meeting tonight, because that's gonna be part of your.
Understood, but I actually have a relevant question about that. So we're going, once that 501(c) is in place, we are in the process currently of identifying grants that might fit this property. So my question to you is, how do we ensure that these grants that we think are properly vetted are indeed properly vetted by this board? In other words, let's say in the next month we identify 4 grants, just for argument's sake. Should we bring those grant applications to this board or get them to this board for review? How does that work?
Okay, I would say this, if you brought 4 completed grant applications to this
Which
committee
is a
and said
heck of
we
a-
filed them, it would be interesting to us and it would show you have some enthusiasm, but it wouldn't change my discussion, because a grant application is not cash.
No, it is not.
Grant
I understand
application
that.
is an application for
Correct.
grants. And most grant applications
Take time.
don't get approved.
No,
If you came to us with a letter from a granting authority saying, we will contribute $200,000 to the purchase if this CPA puts in X hundred thousand, that would be very persuasive to us.
And how late in the process are we going to be able to give you that information? And I ask that for a specific reason. Town meeting will be April or May. It doesn't leave us a ton of time. So, I'm being realistic. I need to know, how late in the process can I say, hey, we got a letter?
Well, we, on one occasion, met the night before.
I heard that earlier tonight, yeah.
If you were
I
to,
might hold you to that.
if you were to come in,
I don't want to, Mr. Crimmins, but I might if I have to.
if you were to come in the night before town meeting and say, we got a grant for $1 million and the property's gonna
Be a very
free,"
different animal,
we would
yes.
definitely
Yep.
say.
Yeah.
Can I just make a couple comments?
Please.
One thing is, John talked about having a willing seller, and whether that's a signed purchase and sale or a letter of commitment, something in writing, just to be clear.
We have a letter of commitment. The owner of the property is actually going through stem cell treatments, and he hasn't been available to sign it. I got an older letter that is signed, but it's gonna shortly
So
fall out
I
of-
just wanted to make it clear.
Yeah, he's expressed his
terms of
intent
willing.
to sign a PNS. He would sign it the second I can physically get to him. He's happy to sign either a letter of intent or a purchase and sales.
Okay, and on the
So-
fundraising piece,
Yes.
it is a short window that you've got to work
Yeah.
with. And say you were to come back to the committee and say, look, at our group has been very active, we've submitted 7 grant applications, we got rejected on 3, we got 1, and we've got 3 more that are still pending. I think we would take all that into consideration, you know. You won't hear back on all of them.
But the
No, we
other thing
won't.
I want to say is that if you come back to us and say, we've been very active, and we're going to have a cake sale, that's not going to be too persuasive.
No, and I believe you, me, I am,
Yeah.
rest assured, I'm well aware of what skin in the game means, as much as I hate the comment, I do. I know what you're saying.
If I may, John, two comments through you,
Please.
one on the sort of the grant application issue. You gotta be careful, because that can be a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
If you suggest to us that these grant applications or other sources of funding, and depending on what that dollar amount is, that may affect the dollar amount we're willing to recommend in CPA funding. So you just need to be careful. More importantly, in my opinion, I want to respond to the question you said, about the window or the timing of this. And I'm glad you brought this up, Mark, now, because I want to use this opportunity to address it not only in the context of that application, but some others that we have. I'm going to recommend tonight that, certainly tonight, we not take any action on any applications that are currently pending before us, to the extent that there are any currently pending before us, until after the first of the year, with the idea that we basically give people till the end of December, anyone that may be looking to submit an application to us, we start holding people to the deadlines that are in our plan. And so that we give people to the end of December to get applications in, and then we not only vet those individual applications, but we look at those applications in the totality as it relates to our fund balances. And we start prioritizing which applications we feel we should act upon in a given town meeting cycle. There may be some applications that we feel are meritorious, but that the timing may not be right. Or there may be applications we feel are not meritorious. But I would like this committee to start applying reasonable deadlines that we may have to alter on occasion, but start applying as a general rule, reasonable applications. We'll give folks till the end of December to get applications into us, with the idea that hopefully by the end of January, we have made our final recommendations, so that when the selectmen close the warrant the first Tuesday in February, we have recommendations into them by that time. And that way, we're not having a meeting the night before the town meeting is being convened. So when the time comes, that's going to be, I'm saying it now to put it out there so folks can be aware of it, but that's what I'm going to suggest on the other matters.
I second your thoughts in general, but I would also say that it's highly unlikely that we would have an appraisal by the end of December.
Agreed.
In this matter.
Or we may not have the appraisal, but our application, for instance, on that point, we could make a recommendation subject to receipt of, I'm not saying I want to either, Joe, but I'm saying, right, no, I understand that. And those might be the cases that perhaps, the timeline gets pushed out a bit on.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
I agree with you in general, but I.
But we
but
need to start
always-
establishing
we always
general
come-
guidelines.
Yeah, we always come back to the problem that there's always going to be an exception, and, all right.
Just every application shouldn't be the exception.
Do you have any other comments?
Well, there's a couple other, we recognize as a group that public funds, i.e. grant money, is going to be extremely difficult to ascertain in such a short window of time.
For sure.
But we have looked at a number of other things, one of which is private donations, corporate donations, and locally sourced fundraising
Well,
for
we
the
leave
property.
all of that to you.
We do, and obviously, we need to have a fully established 501(c). I want the paperwork in hands before I start taking anybody's money, including corporate or private. But I want you to know that it isn't the only source of monies that we're seeking to assist in the purchase of this property. Again, we're gonna be on a very tight rope here as far as when those monies come together. It's timing. And unfortunately, on the other end of this, we have an owner that has stated he'll hang on until the annual town meeting of 2019, but after that, he has to start making his own decisions.
I would just say there's a precedent for this. The Friends of Cape and Runnels is a citizens group with a 501(c)(3) that have raised tens of thousands of dollars and have put in enormous sweat equity. They personally bought the supplies and put the roof on the barn and on the shed. I mean, spent weekends hammering nails.
I'm familiar.
So there's precedent for it. I mean, when citizens get going,
Absolutely.
we can do all kinds of things.
The Friends of Capen are one of the organizations that we're looking at very closely and how they have worked to raise those funds. I know a couple of them, and our intent is to begin discussions with them to help assist us in doing this better.
That's a good thing.
Learn from their
especially since
experience.
this property abuts the Cape and Rose.
Well, it does, and ultimately it'll become one tract if this does
Mark,
come
one
together.
thing you might consider is not starting your own 501(c)(3), but
We
in
thought about
fact,
that.
using them as an agent.
We thought about that. We weren't sure what the temperature might be, so again,
Well, what I would say is if they did that, they would start a separate designated fund
Right.
within the organization. They would not
Just to
move
the
money
general
from the
funds.
Cape and Runnels.
no, that's on my priority list. I'm
But
gonna
they
reach
could
out
s-
to them.
They could start a separate fund. I'm not saying they will, I'm just saying that.
No, right, and I appreciate the comments.
Yeah.
That is something that is on my radar and needs to be done sooner
Then the
rather
less
than
thing to
later.
do.
All right, if.
Well, it makes it a lot easier,
If,
so.
if everybody's okay, I'd like to move to the
I'd
next.
just like to make one comment, which I hear Mark already knows, but if the appraisal comes in a lot less than $1 million, then CPA cannot
Correct.
fund it, just so that the people here know that.
Fully understood, yeah. And we're aware of all the pitfalls. I understand this is a mountain yet, but we're willing to fight the fight.
So
We're
the
looking
appraisal
forward
is
to it.
really critical.
Absolutely,
Yes.
agreed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have a comment? No, if you, yeah, I didn't ask for public comments, and now I will. If you have comments, please come forward. Now, remember, what we're talking about is, there's no application before us at this point.
Well, that's my question. My name is
Yeah.
Cindy Cushman, 560 Pleasant Street. So there was an application submitted,
There was.
completed through all of the items that are expected on the application that's online. So I guess I'm a little confused as to exactly why we have to start all over again.
Well, only because it's a whole different application. And there was an application, but it was not complete. There was no purchase and sale, there was no purchase price, there had been no appraisal. So the application that was before us was incomplete. Basically, we would have told the applicant that we couldn't act on it because it wasn't complete.
But John, if I may, it is fair to say though that 95% of what they had in there is still relevant. They just need the appraisal and the
You
P and
can use
S.
all that material.
Okay,
Added
that's,
to it.
I guess that's what I was misunderstanding, is that we had to.
Absolutely.
So it can be resubmitted with the same information, just the addition of the things you just mentioned?
Yes.
Okay,
and-
so I
but-
thought
But
there was something
hopefully,
else
we
being
would
asked.
also be looking at other sources of funding.
Right, well, we have 5 sources that,
Yeah, and we'd be looking at a willing seller at
Yes.
the price,
yep,
and a financing idea that may show that there's some other sources of funding.
but as far as this committee is concerned, that the private fundraising does not have to come before this board, right?
No, that's up to you.
Okay, so that's up to us as a community to go out and do private fundraising, ask for corporate donation, whatever sources we come up with, crowdfunding, whatever it ends up being. It doesn't have to walk through this board.
We are interested in the outcome of the other financing, not the mechanism.
Okay.
It would only have a bearing as it relates to the amount of funding that you would be requesting from us, because if you were supplementing the purchase price with those other sources, that's where it would be relevant to our discussion.
Okay, and that's what I guess that's where the confusion is, because I think some people in the community think that, oh, we have to walk everything through this board. So, whether we decide as a community to start our own 503C or not, it's up to us.
It's up to you.
Okay, it really has nothing to do with this board.
Right.
The fundraising may become actually more important if the appraisal comes through below what Mr. Kelly is willing to sell it for, in which case that gap would have to be filled by some other source of funds. That's when it becomes crucial. And I was going to mention to Mr. Semenya while I have the microphone, that having done dozens of these applications, that is 501c3, the IRS doesn't move like lightning. So, only when they're collecting taxes. And so, I would suggest to you that you file as quickly as possible.
In the process.
And if you've gotten the instructions, you also know it's not insubstantial filing fee.
No, no, it's not.
And the paperwork is onerous.
Monumental.
Yes.
Like the rest of this.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And she hit the bulk of what I wanted to ask, and thank you for
Please
explaining.
identify yourself for the public.
Pardon me?
Identify yourself for the public.
Nancy Monroe, 209 Pine Street. The only thing left I have to ask, to clarify, was at the first meeting, I think, that addressed this, Mr. Lenahan, if I understood correctly, and you discussed that the Open Space Committee would be handling the appraisal. And you asked John if, okay.
You're the-
And in the
John
past,
is
the
the
Open Space had
representative of
handled
the
the
Open
appraisal.
Space Committee on this.
Yeah, but we don't handle the appraisal.
Okay, so,
Sponsored the recommendation they need from you.
What's that?
They need the
Oh,
recommendation,
yeah.
that was it.
No,
in the past with Glen Echo, that wasn't done through the Open Space.
no.
The reason I bring that up is that, as you know, I'm sure, with all your experience, some of the grants that go through the state have very specific criteria that has to be followed and a very specific timeline. In addition to that, they require review of a warrant article before it's submitted. So to add to the bulk that's already been addressed here, there's a lot to go through. And from what I'm understanding now, all of that has to be done through the Board of Selectmen, if I understand you correctly.
Well, the appraisal has to be put out to bid or not, depending on state procurement law, through the town procurement process, because it's a town appraisal. The town meeting voted to fund an appraisal
Just answer.
for the town. So the town now has to go after
Go through
the
the
appraisal.
procurement, okay, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
That can take a long time.
It could, it could.
And so the criteria that needs to be followed for some of these grants through the state has to be addressed through the procurement document.
It differs depending on what the expected cost of the appraisal would be. There are different levels of what's required, and the best thing to do is to meet, if you can, with the town manager, the procurement officer, and discuss what the criteria are, what those ranges are in terms of how much the town is spending and what the requirements would be at that level.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments on this matter? Then, thank you. We will take this under advisement and move to the next item on the agenda, which is the funding relative to the purchase of the State Theater. I think that article was dismissed unless there's comments on that. Yes, we have comments.
Good evening, I'm Bob O'Regan, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Town Meeting, Representative Precinct 1. Let me introduce Vinnie Maturano. He's President and Chief Executive Officer of the Old Colony Y.
Oh, greetings.
I'm going to, after I make a few preliminary comments on where this project is, invite Vinnie to describe really the viewpoint that he shared with us and shared at a joint meeting with the Redevelopment Authority and the Board of Selectmen for this project. And then for follow-up from their previous presentation, after any questions you may have disappear, and Mr. Cavey and Ms. Howe will finish up. Let me just give you an overview of where things are. There's been a bit of a change with the owner of the property. And there was actually a meeting today. It was not possible to have a meeting with him. In fact, he had declined a meeting previously. He had, but with some effort, he accepted an invitation, and there was a meeting today. And that's about all I can describe from that meeting, and there was a follow-up with the manager, the Economic Development Director, our Mr. Tesdell, and Mr. Cavey and myself, following that meeting on working an action plan to take this and some other downtown development issues further as the State Theater fits into the downtown development. So we have engagement with the owner, which is a positive step, and frankly something that even as late as a week ago I was not sure we would get. Engagement is good. And then what we've been doing, which I'm sure the others will explain more detail, is looking at how this acquisition, what this acquisition would look like, and that's where Old Colony Y could potentially fit in. There's a letter that Vinnie sent to us last month that was sent to you when it was received. Let me put that into the context that we have. So the general vision that the Board of Selectmen has towards this acquisition is for the town to acquire the building, hopefully with CPC funds, for all of the reasons that have been explained and will be developed further. To issue an RFP upon the acquisition for a non-profit entity to take on long-term operating control of the building. Old Colony Y has indicated an interest in that capacity. There's certainly been no discussion of detail on that, nor at this point could there be without an RFP. But they're a valued member of the community who heard about this effort, and they see an interest in the facility, whether or not they're chosen as the operator. But the fact that they are and they have views is healthy. Within the context of that RFP, I anticipate there will be a series of functions for the building to perform, which range from community theater, which it's done in the past, all the way to Broadway level productions, which it certainly physically has the capability of doing. And as the others will explain, there's a number of other small theaters in the area of practically the identical size that are doing very well. And just today, from work I needed in Salem and driving down, I passed billboards for shows going on at the Cabot Theater, roughly the same size as this. at the Chevalier Theater, which is municipally owned by the city of Medford, run by promoter Bill Blumenreich. The Norwood Theater is having productions. I could go on, but that's the opportunity we want to take advantage of for that. Individual shows, community activity, civic activity, all of which could be performed. Town meeting rather than rather than you know, the high school is really at capacity for student activities, which it should be. So they couldn't take a municipal activity really until Christmas. They're jammed, and you know, for those kinds of things. So for all those reasons, it's a building. The RFP will go out. It'll spell out the kinds of activities that the town would want from that property. In terms of contribution from the town, I'm going to suggest that there's already a $500,000 commitment from this committee and town meeting as sort of the last dollar in. I could foresee, for purposes of getting the building up and running, although I'm not asking for it now, that there may be some fundamental infrastructure needs for the building, such as a sprinkler system, that the town might think, to protect its investment, we will want to make sure it get done right away. But other than those fundamental aspects, the RFP will turn over operating control to this nonprofit for on a long-term basis, so that the town will not operate the theater. In essence, it would be a long-term lease in excess of 39 or 40 years.
May I say, though, before we get there, we have to have some indication as to what the value is and whether the owner will sell it at that value.
The appraisal has,
Say it again?
there has been an appraisal completed, and we're engaged with the owner, and we may be able to report on that
Yeah.
shortly.
You have an appraisal.
We have an
I've seen
appraisal.
it. I mean, I've seen the outcome of the appraisal. I haven't really read the appraisal. But I would guess that the owner is not going to be willing to sell it for that price. I mean, I guess that based on what I've heard is his purchase price and his asking, I mean, not even an asking price, his purchase price. And that's an issue that needs to be looked at. I mean, how do you address that issue?
I can't address it now because there have been confidential discussions with the owner, and I would not violate the confidence by getting into any more detail, but to say it's encouraging that he has decided to engage with us.
Okay, but as I understand it, the appraisal you have is for the whole block.
No, it's for the property that include just the building, the storefronts, and the theater itself, not the whole block, just what comprises
Oh, I see.
the theater and the rest of the building, the storefronts that are attached to the theater.
I see, okay, I
Not
didn't
the whole
understand that, and that gives me hope.
He
Because
owns-
I, quite frankly,
he owns
am
more than-
enthusiastic about the project if it could be made to work.
He owns more than just what I just described, but the appraisal just includes the parcel that would be the theater and then the storefronts in front of it. And so we see that, and then the, in parallel to that would be the historical oversight of the renovation, the private, or the non-town fundraising efforts. And we see definitely a role in a requirement within the community. Perhaps the Friends of State Theater as buoyed up. Thanks to Mr. Cavey, we've formed a committee which he will describe more of advisors, a robust committee, and hopefully we'll have some more appointments to that shortly. So there is, and the gratifying thing is, the enthusiasm for this project extends outside the boundaries of Stoughton. And it's incredible to hear. There's a theater operator who reached out to me who heard about it. And the words were, "You're crazy if you don't pull this off." I told him I'm crazy anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But
Can we hear from this gentleman
So-
as to what your interest is in the property?
Well, thank you again. My name is Vinnie Martirano, and I'm the president of the Oak Colony YMCA. And I've been in my present position for the last 26 years.
Yeah.
My apology for my voice. The last day or so, something's going on, and I think I've got a cold coming. So anyway, I think certainly our interest in working within the town and community of Stoughton has always been of great interest to us as an organization. And in the 08-09 period, we had the opportunity to be invited in and to begin operating what then was the Stryer Jewish Community Center. And I think the last 10 years really have been a great a wonderful time in breathing new life into a structure and an entity, a program center that perhaps had not reached its capacity to serve the community. And so I think that's just one example, and we've had a number of examples over time where we've worked in communities, with communities, in efforts to bring great value to activities that serve people. So, and certainly I think some of you know that if you've been at the Stryer, we still call it the Stryer. Danny Stryer was a good friend of the Y and personal friend. But that center has a performing arts auditorium, if you will, and so I'm not sure that we've ever fully been able to engage. However, that certainly is an interest, and the area of performing arts within YMCA's around the country is one of those areas that's evolving and growing of interest and so forth, particularly to those that they may not be interested in health and wellness and so forth. So some weeks back, Mr. Reagan reached out to me, and we were actually talking on another subject, and quite frankly, this is the first that I had heard about this opportunity before the town, and asked, would the Y have an interest to be involved in some way? And my immediate reaction, well, we're part of the community. We think we have some capacity. Certainly have some interest in bringing activities to the community, and the area of interest is certainly something that we would, we see one building upon, and I think helping to nurture and flourish, if you will. So with that, Mr. O'Regan asked, would I be in a position to at least express our interest in supporting and getting engaged, with obviously understanding that details need to be worked out. But I think what I can certainly share with you is that we're in this community, we're proud to be part of the community, and the degree to which we can be helpful to make this success and breathe new life into that theater, we would really look forward to that and be as supportive as we possibly can.
May I ask a question? Under ideal circumstances, we'd like to see a complete application, which is to say seller, buyer, rejuvenation costs, contracts. I mean, we'd like to see the whole thing. Now, we understand we don't live in an ideal world, but the cost is more than, of course, the purchase price. And there's a very substantial cost that comes after the purchase. And I've heard numbers as high as $8 to $10 million. The question is, to what extent are you willing to participate in the economic cost of restoring the building and so on? You don't have to answer that tonight. I mean, because it's not fair to ask you that question. But it is a question that will be asked when we see a financial plan for the development of the building. And so the question is, are there circumstances in which you're willing to make a financial commitment also, and without putting a dollar sign on it, or even asking you to make a commitment tonight? And if it's not feasible at all, I mean, that's something we should be aware of.
Well, I think what I can tell you is, you know, every project that anyone's involved in has to somewhere have the, you know, the viability
Yeah.
to be successful and fully fund itself. So,
Yeah.
if you're asking me, does the Y have $8 to $10 million to invest in this project, and are we prepared to do so today? You know, I'm not in a position to be, obviously, to make that kind of commitment. What we can this community, and I define community broadly, you know, potentially over a period of time, conduct fundraising and a development effort to try to bring those kind of resources. And do we have capacity in helping to bring that along? We've done that in many communities. You know, the reality is that the Stoughton Y, the reality is that, you know, quite frankly, we acquired that facility for about $7 million, and we've just completed about $6 million investment into it. It didn't happen overnight, it was a 10-year period, and so from the perspective of is the Y prepared to bring some of the talent that we have and the manager support to do the kind of things that can bring that project forward? The answer would be yes.
Well, that's very encouraging. And then the next question, of course, is once you have the management responsibility, how does that affect the ability of the town to be involved in using the property and to have anything to say about, you know, what goes on inside? Because I don't know the answer to
Isn't
that
that all
question.
tied into an MOU or
Yeah.
something eventually?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to say the devil's in the details, but, you know, ultimately, you know, there's gonna, would have to be some clear understanding
Yeah, absolutely.
that talks about how.
I would like to ask a follow-up question of yours. So, Vinnie, do you see the Y's role, or as you described it, your interest in it, more along the lines of the fundraising piece that you described, similar to the capital campaign that you folks, as you mentioned, just completed? Or do you see it more on an operational standpoint after the renovations were completed, or some combination of the two?
I think some combination, you know, Barry, you can't do one without the other. You know, the reality is, and from a program perspective, you know, again, we haven't really sufficiently worked out what, you know, what the, you know, really what the master plan would be. But obviously, you're gonna want to have that facility available as a benefit for the community. And I think, you know, that means involving people, involving organizations. I would assume there would be some kind of an advisory group that would help make, not only, you know, develop the master plan, but at the same time, the tactical details of how you move the thing forward.
Well,
And these kind of details would be identified in the RFP, which would be developed with community participation, and then they would be incorporated in the operating agreement where the town would enter into with the successful, if it's Old Colony Y, and I just have to make clear, if it's Old Colony Y, on the nature and extent of the facilities. And I believe the prospect would be, you know, to serve the community, and also part of the service is the economic engine to the downtown that this will provide. So there's wonderful service activity that can be done out of that building, and community activity, and there's raw commercial activity, and the challenge will be to get that done, and that would be part of the RFP and part of the ultimate agreement. All of that would be done not by the town, but by the successful operating entity.
Yeah. I will speak for myself and not for the committee now. We've been keeping our powder dry, which is to say, we have funds. And our own plan says that we should emphasize the redevelopment of the center. Personally, I believe that this theater is the kind of thing that would stimulate tremendous interest in additional development in the center. Once we had this thing working, once we said to the public, we are committed to doing something, I think it would snowball. And I think we'd get back in spades everything that we put into it over time. But you know, that's a vision, not a fact. I very encouraged to hear you say what you're saying, and encouraged to hear that you haven't given up, because I understand the process to date has been frustrating. But I, for one, think that this is a tremendous idea, if it can work. And there's so many moving parts that have to be addressed so that we can together be assured that it's going to work. I don't think you want to throw money into a black hole any more than we do.
If you try, you can succeed. If you don't try, you will fail.
Yeah, that's
And that's the point we're at with this.
I'm with you on that, and I commend you for bouncing back as often as you have bounced back, because this is a difficult thing, and I commend this guy in the back room too for the work that he's done, so.
There's more detail that Steve and Christine can provide if you have time for it. I don't know if Vin's been gracious in taking this time, and I want to thank him for his engagement in the community, just to show us all, not only his organization, but the fact that the interest in this extends beyond the boundaries of the town of Stoughton.
Yes.
That there's a recognition with this and some other information that this is something that would benefit the region, but would start to draw into the center of commercial activity from other communities. People who go elsewhere will come here. And that's what
I
we need.
agree with that concept, and I hope we can put some flesh on those bones, because.
Well, let me get out of your way and thank Vin.
Thank you.
John, if I may though, and I certainly welcome Selectman Cavey and Selectman Howe to speak to us again this evening. I think the detail, to use your word, Bob, that this committee will be looking for at this point in time are the items that John alluded to and that we have mentioned in the past, which is an agreement with the owner. And I think, at least now speaking only for myself, although we were provided with a copy of the appraisal that you did receive, the nature of that appraisal and the nature of the methodology used to come up with the valuation, to me, raises some additional questions, and I don't know to what extent the selectmen will be able to address those questions tonight. It may be more appropriate that it be addressed in conjunction with the answering the question about an agreement with the owner. Because otherwise, I think we may be spinning our wheels a little bit tonight.
And some of those might be best done offline, just because we all don't have the appraisal in front of us, and there are other factors of discussing an appraisal. I can say that I would anticipate most of the operational questions that you have, what, where, how, who, would be in the RFP, and as Christine in particular will be able to address. The goal is to have the RFP, or at least the draft RFP, to this committee, so that you know what it is we're committed to go looking for. It is, we're careful about using taxpayer support on a hypothetical. So we're also understanding that getting people to respond to an RFP on the hypothetical that the town will do it is a challenge. I know my company, others of you, if we got an RFP that said, we're interested in buying something, if you give us a good enough proposal to run it, we'd say, let's go golfing, because that's just too much commitment. So we can certainly, I believe the board is committed that the investment of staff in preparing a solid RFP for you and the Committee on Finance and Taxation, and if need be, town meeting to see, so you know what we're out to do, that anticipates these questions. And by all means, we had a great conversation with you, Barry, 2 weeks ago. If you have particular aspects of the operation of this facility, even if we can't and shouldn't answer the questions at this time, we can address those points in how we would frame the RFP. So you know it's important to us to get those answered, and answered right, before we cede operating control of the building. There are definite financial benefits to everybody for the town to not have operating control of this building, in addition to the fact that I don't want to be taking tickets to the matinee on Saturday afternoons.
Counselor, you have my memo with respect to my question.
And we've answered it
Yes,
in detail.
you have responded, but everybody needs to.
Any questions, just send them along and we'll do our best.
So Mr. O'Regan just said he answered. Is that something that was provided to you? Because I don't think the committee has seen
Oh, well,
responses to your memo.
I will forward it to you,
Okay.
with my apologies,
Okay.
because,
But
yeah,
unless I missed something, I don't think we've received it.
no,
Okay.
I agree you haven't.
Okay.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you, and we'll get out of there.
Very much. And thank you for what the Y is doing.
They know what they're doing.
All right, next item on the agenda.
I think, Ron, I think the
Oh,
selectmen,
you still, I'm very sorry. If you have more comments, let's hear.
Thank you again. And just to clarify, the questions that you had sent to the board for us to address were sent back on November 25th. And I believe they were sent to Barry, I want to say, as well as yourself, to forward to the rest of the board.
to
And they
Barry
were-
Castle,
Correct.
not to me.
Yeah,
Correct.
I may not have forwarded them.
Yeah, I'm very sorry we didn't forward it to
You guys should probably
We
introduce
should
yourselves.
Christine Howe, Board of Selectmen.
Steve Kibbe, Board of Selectmen, thank you. So yeah, we can forward that along as well. It's about, I think, 79 pages that address the questions that you've asked.
Be sure to forward.
Oh, that's what I'm making a note for me to
Yeah.
do now. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So yeah, so that was we did our best to be thorough on that. It was close to 80 pages of information related to the questions that you had asked. In there, you'll also find the vast majority of it was appendix information. I think the body of the questions were about 5 pages, and the reference to the appraisals, construction costs, estimates, as well as other information that was relevant, case studies that we looked at, sample agreements that other communities use that were very similar to what we were looking to do, all to give you an idea of a picture of what we were proposing. And 1 second. I apologize, I just had it up and I wanted to, so in that document, unfortunately, it looks like you might not have had a chance, maybe everybody didn't get a chance to read it. But we laid out a general plan, which is, it's already been addressed at a very high level, which is that our interest is in the preservation of the building, and it's not in running a theater. We see a historical and cultural significance to it, and we also see that the benefit to the downtown economically is substantial, but it is not our interest to be in the business of running theaters. So our interest is in preserving the building, and then also in our particular model, using a nonprofit that would take control of the building. And that would free them from the procurement laws, and they would be able to run it much more efficiently than we could. If you want to talk a little bit about the effect it will have on the downtown, what exactly it is that this is so important to us.
Yeah, sure, and I think we talked about this at the last meeting when we were before you. You know, the downtown task force is basing its work that was created over the spring, is basing a lot of its work on the various plans and studies that have been completed for the downtown, including the master plan and the Stoughton Redevelopment Authority's Stoughton Downtown Development Plan, in which they identify that the theater is a key and critical component to the success of the downtown. And specifically in other communities, usually there's a driver to you know, encourage visiting of the downtown and activity in the downtown, and we feel that the theater can sort of be that driver of that activity to help support and elevate other businesses around it. And you know, just to reiterate, those are various plans that have gone through community forums, that have gone through public outreach, public input, have been adopted by the town as a whole. So we feel that there is a strong, support for this from the community as a whole, and the fact that those exist in the plans that this town has adopted to help guide it over the next, 20 years or until we do an update to that. So, from that perspective, I think that's what's important, and I can dig in a little more in the RFP process. If you have questions about that, I'll let Steve continue his part of the presentation.
I do have a question, if I may. So Christine, on the RFP, just not to again get into the specifics of it, but just to follow up on what Bob had said, the time frame approximately for getting that to us is what, do you think?
Yeah, so I think more what we would get to you would be an outline of what the RFP would look like. An RFP of this caliber and magnitude would be several hundred pages. Other communities that have done this recently, North Adams comes to mind. They have a small theater and they just issued an RFP for a nonprofit to take over, and you have to write the RFP itself, you have to call in area experts and really experts on whether it's creating a business plan, specific types of insurance you'd need to have, the historical components you want to be included and preserved, the financing models. So, town staff is very knowledgeable and great, but they don't have the depth of expertise for this particular type of request for proposals. So you would need to sort of get that input and write this together as a team who
So
wrote
the
RFP.
outline then would be?
The outline would be similar to what I'm describing, with components that we would include, and then maybe some of the experts we would tap that are, statewide, from state agencies, that kind of thing. Other communities use the models that are out there, and explain the timeline. So when you go out for solicitation, the required advertising, what we would want to do for the advertising period, interviews, set the criteria, those kinds of things.
But the timeline to get that to us would be what in your estimate?
Probably, in January would probably be the earliest, just
Okay.
based on
Right,
the
right,
holidays.
Right, sure.
So,
No, I didn't know if you were
yeah.
gonna say February, March, whatever. because
No, I think
it.
Yeah, I
it
think
has
just
a
to
big-
meet the deadlines that you've described earlier
Next meeting
and get
is the
these
second.
on the warrant, and then depending on what could happen with negotiations,
Second Wednesday.
which I'm not,
First Wednesday.
I wasn't at the debrief,
That's what tonight is.
but, we don't know what's gonna happen with that, and this is still a pressing concern, so, the sooner we can get that, obviously, the better.
So are you talking about just getting the framework to us?
Yeah, it would be impossible to write the, 250, 300-page RFP that would have to go out to bid, or out for solicitation, unless we convene those experts and everything. And as Mr. Regan had mentioned earlier, to, allocate the town resources to this without some sort of knowledge of having funding available to actually purchase the theater would be kind of a waste in my mind.
Well, what do you think the feasibility is of having a purchase and sale agreement?
I'm not involved in the negotiations, so I can't answer that.
I mean, that's the key to buying time. If you could get a purchase and sale with a closing date, you could buy some time. I mean, time is really not our friend in this whole matter.
So you are in negotiations with the owner of the theater? I mean, I know
As
you
far
want to
as-
say,
well, all I
keep
know
telling
is
us
that
that,
the
but
owner met with town staff today. That's all
Okay.
I know. I wasn't at the meeting, I wasn't at the debrief after the meeting, and I don't feel, all that the chairman explained is all that we know, so.
it's just that, and I'm speaking for myself, it's a little frustrating
Yeah.
to hear all of these wonderful plans when the crux of the matter is you don't even know yet if this fellow is going to sell the theater and for what amount, if he even is.
But if I can add on, I find it hopeful. I don't think I understood that amount of the evaluation that I saw, the appraisal was for just the theater and not the block.
I didn't understand.
So that makes a huge difference, and that makes it plausible that he might, for that amount of money, sell this chunk, because that's not the total he bought for his 1 point or whatever million, and he retains the other part. I can at least see how.
Dwight, the only thing he bought more than what they're talking about is the furniture store. That's a separate building. But when we say the theater building.
It is that whole.
It's from Acapulco's at Railroad Avenue you got the theater behind it,
Okay,
then you've
so
got the couple of stores on the first floor, and then, you know,
So
the
that whole
second
line,
floor.
so then indeed,
Yes.
the amount of money he did pay was for all of that,
And the
and now there's
appraisal is also for all of that.
okay, so
It's
that,
for the same- it's
then
for
we're
the same
back
parcel.
to,
Yes.
I'm not as optimistic anymore suddenly.
He has a separate parcel.
I mean,
Is the portion
Go
of
back
the,
to where you were.
Well, the appraisal was for, the appraisal came out at 950,000.
Right.
is the portion of the building that's occupied by that church included in the appraisal? No.
No, just the
that's
things
actually-
that are-
There is no church.
Yeah,
There is no-
Yeah.
Where?
So
that's
if you're-
way down the other
If you're
end.
looking at the theater, there's actually, the building itself
No,
has
no,
a
no,
higher
exactly
level roof
right. I'm
than
on
the-
there's a street between them, Wyman Street. Yeah,
Right, right,
exactly,
right.
exactly. I got it wrong.
But, so I'm clear, we're not talking the upholstery building, correct?
That's a separate building, right? This is just one
Right, we're
parcel.
talking to the left of that, down the Railroad Avenue.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Just the
Which we
one,
also
the same
own.
one from our
Right,
previous
I know you own
application,
that,
the
but
same one.
that early on in one of the applications, there was some mention of that building because it's owned by him, even though it's a separate building, separate assessors parcel. But so I just
And
want
then
to
has
make
the
sure we're
seven
on
tenants
board.
who are paying rent.
It was part of what he
From whatever
purchased,
we
but
submitted,
not part of
not
what we're
included any of
looking
that.
at, right?
None of the applications we submitted included any of that, so.
So, just if I could ask, so the appraisal, compared to what the current owner paid for it, is less than what the current owner paid for that same
Yes.
piece of property, okay.
Which is an interesting juxtaposition, given the fact that we have another piece of property that may be under our purview where the owner is asking for much more than he paid for it. Just putting it in the context of things that are in front of this board. Possible.
Joe?
Yeah, one of the, and I think I mentioned this at the last time you came in front of us, the 200-pound gorilla in the room is the cost.
Yeah, I'm almost there.
After Thanksgiving.
Is the cost of rehab.
Yeah.
And we've had the expertise in this town. The Master Facilities Committee hired a professional group called DRA, I believe. And they've done a very professional job in giving the town an indication of how much and what priority maintenance should be done on our municipal buildings. What this committee has not seen, I certainly haven't seen, I'm sure that no one else has it, is a professional appraisal, not in the value of the property, but in the rehab costs for a property of this kind.
We did have the assessment
Yeah,
conducted
that's,
and was
that's
included in the,
Appendix C
Yeah.
of this document.
so you did receive it?
Yes, I read it.
Okay,
Yes.
No,
Nine-
we will circulate that.
on 9/4, okay.
9,000,004.
Oh.
You're talking about receiving the
The
appraisal?
updated-
No, no,
Talking
the-
about,
No, the renovation cost was in
Yeah.
one of the documents, and it was
9.4.
9.4
I
million.
think it's,
some document went to some people, but not all
Okay, I have a
people
problem with
prior
that.
to town
Earlier
meeting, so,
conversation about-
just so we're clear.
Yeah, I think that,
We did have
Looks
that
like-
right,
completed,
right.
with the, what was the name there, McKinnell?
yeah,
McKinnell
McKinnell
and
and
Taylor. And I believe they actually broke down what the total rehab reno total would be, and then actually to like rehab it to an to be able to open. Maybe the
yeah.
But
initial.
who did that?
McKinnell, and Taylor.
Pardon me?
McKinnell, and Taylor.
I think we're the same ones on the town hall windows, if I'm not, that name sounds like the same ones.
Town Hall's architect. Is it?
They're the
architect?
house architects for the town. We have engaged a house, if you will, a house doctor, an on-call architectural firm. They had expertise in this, and they came in and they performed this, so it's part of the on-call.
Bob, was he given permission to go into the facility and, you know, like really get in? He was, okay.
yeah. The first page of that document does include the fact that there were limitations on his ability to estimate.
Yeah, that's why.
But that's all part of the course, but he broke it down.
About 4 or 5 categories.
Yeah, he broke it down by architectural cost, fire protection, plumbing, mechanical, and electrical.
And the total cost was?
Total cost that he has all in is 9.56.
9.56 million.
million, yeah. And that is for, as I understand it, a full restoration. So renovation that just got the doors open would be, as I understand this document, would be less than that.
Is that
But it's not
reno-
broken out to that level of detail.
Is that renovation consistent with the plan that the Friends of the Theater had presented? In other words, what's the standard of the renovation? Is it an open door, come on in,
No, it'd
show
be
start?
full, this number would get full restoration to,
Yeah.
you know, historic standards.
Yeah.
So it's probably because of the limitations on the, you know, the study that was done, it could be higher, it could be lower. But I think it provides a good ballpark.
I think what this committee's going to be looking for is a plan that shows the project start to finish with the manager in place and some sense of what the management agreement would look like and the scope of the management agreement, where the funds are going to come from, at least as thoroughly as it can be done within the time frame. Those are all the questions that.
So we can't put out an RFP for a management agreement. I don't think we can do that reasonably without some assurance that a contract will be signed. Typically, when you go out to bid, when you do an invitation for bids, for example, you can't do it and not have the funds in place. That's precluded under the procurement law, Chapter 30B or 149 in that instance. So I don't think we can draft the RFP to include the management agreement, put it out, get someone in place.
I don't think
And
that's
then
what he was
it's all
asking for.
contingent on this board's vote.
But you could begin to, you could get, for example, a model management agreement. There are other towns that have them.
Well, we did include a.
Yeah, Appendix A,
draft
I believe,
lease
has
agreement.
exactly that.
Yeah.
It's the management agreement between the town of Plymouth and the Greater Plymouth Performing Arts Center.
Yeah.
Which their facility is also town-owned. They have a 99-year lease, and it was purchased with CPC funding.
Yeah.
You're talking about one of the things that was part of the application that was submitted by the Board of Selectmen. Is that what you're talking about or not?
Yes, on the 26th. 25th.
Yeah, I sent it to Chairman and yourself on December 25th.
On
November 25th.
November 25th.
Yeah, yeah.
We were anticipating we'd have a meeting of this group and come before you before the special town meeting to address the concerns that were raised at the other meeting, had set vote to take no action and all that. Obviously, that didn't happen, which is understandable because of the time constraints. So we gathered all the information that we thought would answer these questions to send to you to read in anticipation of this meeting. But understanding now that only some of you got it, sounds like we're in the same position we were about 3 weeks ago. So I don't know if maybe
No,
you're
that was
anticipating
a-
having another meeting after you can review some of the material, or if you have other questions that maybe, you can send to us after reading it so we can help
Which is
answer
still,
those.
though, Part B with Part A is still the purchase and sale and the agreement.
Right.
That, till that's there, we can talk about this other stuff and understand it or not understand it, but
I say you should definitely read the updated application, send us any questions, because as we've discussed before, the PNS may or may not happen. The whole reason we had that article at the special town meeting was because we weren't sure if we'd be facing a demolition of a building or not, and we'd have to do an involuntary taking. I mean, I'm hopeful that that won't happen, just because of the fact that we actually had a meeting with the owner. So I don't know how certain it is that we can get the PNS, so I wouldn't necessarily put everything on hold until we have that PNS, because then very well maybe that dire situation will be back where we were.
I think you're gonna find it, speaking for myself, but hearing the comments of my colleagues up here, I think it's going to be very difficult for this committee to make a recommendation without an agreement in place.
I agree with that.
So-
But I think if we can flesh out all the other things.
Well, I agree
Well,
with
a
that
lot of the
also.
other things are gonna flow from that, because, for instance, if a price is agreed to, then we have the issue, is the appraisal above or below that price? I have questions on the appraisal. that I won't get into tonight, but I have
That's a
questions.
good example to forward to us in
On the
advance, yeah.
appraisal. I'll just real quickly state that, of the three methods of appraising, that the one chosen, because it is a unique property, it's the most difficult one to really quantify. It's based on a lot of variables. The income approach to appraising takes a commercial building and looks at the net operating income. So right there, you have questions, what's the income, what are the expenses?
the capitalization
Then it
rate?
applies a capitalization rate, which is also quite subjective. So that number can vary widely based on those variables. That then raises the question, if another appraisal, if we entered into an agreement, and we were to get another appraisal, if that appraisal is more or if that appraisal is less, it changes the dynamic greatly. But I think, Dwight has said, others have said, I've said, I think it begins and ends with an agreement with the owner. I think what we heard at town meeting last week would suggest to, I think, everyone in this room, that without such an agreement, whether we recommend approval or not, it's not going to happen. And that's my humble opinion.
We didn't hear this at town meeting last week, so I didn't get a sense of the.
Can I just offer that it may affect our ability to work with the owner to reach an agreement if this committee is working diligently on many other aspects that need to be dealt with to get to yes? If nothing moves because there's no agreement, it might be there's no agreement. If a lot of things move but for an agreement, there may be an agreement.
I mean, Mr. Crimmins, you're right that several questions will probably come out of whatever the agreement might look like if we do reach one. But I also think, as Mr. Moran had said, he's got questions about the management, the draft RFP, all that kind of stuff. So if we can get those questions and keep this process sort of moving,
We can keep moving forward, but I don't think we're gonna get to a point of a vote on a recommendation without an agreement, is what I was getting at.
Well, let me say, I think an agreement is very important. I would also say, with respect to an appraisal, I have never seen an appraisal with respect to which you could not argue. Virtually every page, every approach is subjective, everyone.
Yeah.
And so, to the extent that it is a qualified appraisal, I'm willing to give it some room. However, I do think the agreement is very important. I think at some point you've got to have some indication that there's a willing seller and at a price, and that price has to be consistent with an appraisal. John, did you want to make a comment?
Just to, going back to when we.
Please come forward to the mic, because this is being taped, and introduce yourself.
Just wanted to, one thing is, John Steinle with the Friends of the State Theater. When we had submitted our application, one of the things we had asked the board to do is to take our application based on that it would probably be an eminent domain taking, or because we may not have the appraisal at this time. I believe it's on the very first page of your application process, is that an appraisal is not necessary if there's an eminent, potential for an eminent domain taking. And I think that's what the chairman was probably trying to refer to, is to keep this moving forward and just, we need to get the committee, to just keep moving it forward. It's part of the strategy for negotiations.
Well, I would
so
say,
just
I would say that even if there's going to be an eminent domain taking, and that's a whole different issue, you still have to have an appraisal. We have to have an appraisal.
You have the appraisal, but you don't need the PNS or whatever.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's part of your application, and that's the way we were looking at it. And I think that's what the chairman was trying to refer to.
Yeah, I guess I would argue that the process you're describing makes perfect sense, but that the potential for eminent domain does actually introduce a special case for which a PNS would not be necessary. You wouldn't be trying to figure the difference between the appraised value and the agreed cost, because they would be identical.
We have another item, there's people sitting back there waiting to present. Let me just say, I think we understand the problems here, and I commend you for your efforts, I really do. I hope we can move this thing forward. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's gonna take a lot of energy and effort by a lot of people to make this happen, and there's a real high probability that it can't happen. So I would just say thank you for what you're doing, and let's see how we can move it along.
Sure. I would like to just say one other thing, that when we first presented our application, your willingness to see it on such short notice, I apologize for, and during that meeting. And I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time and being very serious about both your responsibilities to the CPA, but also your responsibilities to the community and being flexible with us. You're my dad for that, and I just want to be very sincere that I appreciate that you're willing to do that. As we continue on, please let me know if you have questions. Mr. Kessel, if you don't mind, just CCing us when you forward the email, this information, because I hope that a lot of questions are answered in there. It is a lengthy document, and I hopefully will satisfy. During our last meeting, the committee expressed that the answers to these questions was that was sort of the finish line in a sense. That was what you guys were looking for. That's not to say that we're done and everything's been answered, but that was the standard that we understood to be what we had to meet.
So we will read these documents with high expectations when they.
Please do.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are gonna get them.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I apologize for not sending them.
Well, I
It kind of came on the
apologize.
eve of town meeting, and
That's
if I
right. No, it's
didn't, I
okay. It's okay.
apologize.
If possible, could you include us on future agendas in the event that we do have an update that might be pertinent, and then we will,
Well, I think until this matter is disposed of one way or the other, it will continue to be on the agenda.
perfect.
I appreciate your asking. We will do that.
Just so that I can walk away with a concrete understanding of what our to-do list looks like. Are there currently any asks of the Board of Selectmen? Is there anything that you need from us in addition to?
Purchase and sale of it. I'm serious, I tell you.
Keep those
Speaking,
negotiations going.
we'll keep moving along with the other items, but I'll say it down the record. If last week showed us anything, an eminent domain taking, with CPC, you can take the property. You guys have the right to take the property. It's not gonna happen with CPC. Town meeting will not approve it with CPC funds. I'll go on the record right here to say it. My opinion, not the committee's, my opinion. Board of Selectmen, you folks know, you have the right to take the property. Where CPC comes into play is, if CPC funds are gonna be used in a taking, it requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting. What I saw last week, that's not gonna happen. So, we're not gonna tell you what to do, but I think what you're hearing from us is, without an agreement, it's gonna be very difficult.
I understand. We have a responsibility and a duty that we're gonna have to see through to the end, one way or the other. So I appreciate your time and your
And we do wish you help, but it sounds like we don't. We'd love to see this happen, but we have to do what we have to do.
Of course,
so.
of course.
And please send any questions that may result from this, so that we can come and talk about them.
Okay, thank you.
So as we review, if anybody has any questions on the application itself, to submit them to you?
Yeah, to myself.
Yeah, and just to keep the flow of information manageable, I think probably they should send them to you.
Excuse me.
And then you can then send them to us, and then we'll send them back to you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a suggestion, and in order to be fair to all parties, my suggestion is that the comments go to Barry, and that Barry's the contact person with the Board of Selectmen, so that you don't, that Selectman Howard doesn't get a question from me, and, that kind of thing. The whole board the whole committee needs to understand the responses to the questions that individual members raise, and that the communication should be committee-wide, and not just with one or two people.
I agree. I agree, and any question that I get, I will transmit and CC everyone.
Don't we just have to be a little careful of open meeting law?
There's no back and forth.
We're not
about it.
deliberating.
Send
No
the
deliberation,
questions
it's not, it's just informational question, it's asking questions and receiving information. It's
Barry,
debating
please,
the merits.
please forward this question to the Board of Selectmen.
Yes,
You know,
then
that's what we're
come back
talking
and
about.
address it.
Can I clarify, because Joe mentioned to me, have we changed, before these folks leave, so we can at least let them know when we're meeting next as well? Have we changed our meeting schedule?
The first meeting, the first Wednesday in.
It's now the first, it's the first one, okay.
So it's the 2nd of January.
Okay. Are we meeting on the 2nd of January?
Well, is that when the first one?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's why, can we,
Couldn't find my little
can we get that clarified before these folks leave? That might be a difficult night to meet, is all I'm getting
That
at.
would be a difficult.
Maybe we should meet, at least for the month of January. I don't know.
So for in
We'll start off the year
January,
with an exception.
I'm trying to find it. There it is.
Before I say I'm available on the 9th, I should look. I have it down, when did we change from the second Wednesday to the first Wednesday?
Well, a couple of meetings ago, we changed.
John Linehan.
I missed that.
No, we moved it to the second to accommodate me.
The second Wednesday, right?
Because you didn't.
Well, but the second doesn't accommodate me, so the question was, does the first accommodate more people? I don't know the answer to that. But
Well, I kind of blocked it out.
the first Wednesday in January is the 3rd, not the 2nd.
It's the
No,
second,
it's the
John.
second.
Second? Oh, I got the wrong year.
That'll do it.
2019's here already, that's unbelievable. You just got it in 2018.
Yeah, I can do the second, people.
The second will work for me.
I didn't realize we'd switched from the second Wednesday of the month to the first Wednesday.
Okay.
No, I still have it.
Must have been one of those meetings I
Let's
missed.
set the next meeting then for the second Wednesday in January.
January 2nd.
We're jumping
No,
ahead.
on the second Wednesday.
January 9th.
Okay.
I thought you said that didn't work.
That's what I have it in my calendar as, January 9th.
I will make it work.
Because I
Do we wanna
still
look at changing
had it as the second Wednesday of the
No,
month.
I can.
Because I blocked out all those,
I can
I
make
hope
it.
that's not a
The
permanent
second
change.
Wednesday is very inconvenient
Yes.
to me, but I
and
can,
I made provisions for that throughout the year already.
for the second.
Could I make
No, for
it?
the first.
Okay.
So if I'm hoping this is the only exception.
I was gonna say that, maybe for January, we meet on the 9th, and then starting in February, we go to the first Wednesday of the month.
I'll second that.
Okay.
January 9th, okay.
Just, Barry, can you send that out to all of us?
Yeah.
in the future, just so we all change it?
What I'll do is I'll send out a schedule.
Because Michael Barrett isn't here.
All right. Anything more on this from anyone in the room? Then we will move on to the next item on the
Thank you
agenda,
very
with
much.
great gratitude for what you can do.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is Cedar Hill Golf Course.
We're gonna be 6.5 hours.
Supper.
Why does he always complain about the time? We're going by the agenda.
He came back from Florida just for this meeting.
That's what it is.
These comments all the time.
Yeah.
Forrest Lindwell from the Cedar Hill Golf Operations Committee. I submitted electronic copy of the final application signed by Gary Alacra, who is the chairperson of the Cedar Hill Golf Operations Committee back on November 19th.
Mine's dated on the 16th.
And this is a signed copy, hard copy for everyone. Excuse me. One thing that I did differently than last time, it's still the same project, but rather than send this plan to everyone, it would have blown up all of your computers. I put a 11 by 17 picture, if you will, and then I numbered the various improvements, and I'll quickly go through them. There isn't really been anything that's changed since the preliminary presentation, excuse me, back in November. The primary function is shown as number 1 is the extension, enlargement, if you will, of hole number 6 on the golf course, which would create a par 5 hole. The second one out front is to reconstruct the parking lot, practically triple the size of it to a 72-car space with full asphalt, guardrail, and best management practices at the pond for water quality improvements, water quality pre-treatment, if you will. Excuse me. And also that would include Number 5, which is to prepare an invasive species removal and management plan for the borderline of that pond between what is now the edge of the asphalt would become a curbed land, a curbed run of granite curb, excuse me. There's a buffer from there to the water's edge, and that's where the invasive species removal management plan would be conducted.
I have a question. Do you know what invasive species you're looking to remove there?
That's a bit above my level of expertise. I can tell you that the Environmental Affairs Officer, who I have included an email from him in support of the work he will do with us, that's the one thing we would hire a wetland scientist for. Okay, he just advised me, and I reviewed it. Yes, there were some Phragmites down there. There's some other issues. Okay, but what all beyond the Phragmites, I really couldn't tell you. But it is something that is worth doing, and it's a two-step approach. One is you do a lot of treatment, you cut, you dab, you do all of that. Second part is you go back after one season. If that hasn't worked, you pull them out and you replant a native species. Okay, so that's why we call it both a removal and management plan. Okay, so generally you have to go through 2 full growing seasons to accomplish that. The next issue is to expand the pond up at hole number 5, and that's kind of hidden up there as number 3. It's a small, I call it the frog pond. It's a spring-fed pond just off the green at hole number 5 that can serve as an additional or supplemental irrigation source for the expanded par 5 hole, as well as the extension, if you will, in the back area of the golf course. The Environmental Affairs Officer would like to certify a vernal pool that is up there. It's in a wooded area known as number 4, and again, I apologize, that isn't showing up all that well, but it's above the written name of Cedar Hill. So that's the overall of the project. The price is the same as it was in November. The cost, if you will, is $450,000.
I have a question also on the map. The golf course obviously is a number of parcels. It's tough to identify which ones are actually part of the golf course. Maybe, there's a way to do it with an outline of the...
Yeah, it's hard to pick that off from this aerial, okay? I can give you this plan, which will show you exactly where all of the holes are, and it is the line that borders those all the way around on the outside, okay?
Yep.
So I'll be glad to send that to you. Just don't try and open it. Excuse me. It's an AutoCAD drawing.
Mr. John?
I have a few more things
Okay, go right ahead.
if that's okay. Excuse
That
me.
you were through.
I did include a draft warrant article, but of particular importance, I think, this evening is there were 3 points that are comments that I took away from our last meeting, and that is on this page that is just precedes the estimate, if you will, or the last page of the application. There were 3 points or 3 sets of comments. The first one of which was to make sure that we check the box with the MIAA, that's the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association. The purpose of the par 5 hole is to make this, it will make this the home course.
Hold on first, I think we're having trouble finding where you are.
Okay.
What page?
It's just before the estimates, just before the cost
Yeah, the page
estimates?
before the cost estimate, which is all the handwritten line items.
Okay.
So it's after your item 12, on the page that has your item 12. The MIAA, okay, is the one that sanctions golf courses to be eligible for high school golf meets, if you will. Right now, Stoughton High plays golf in Easton, I believe. And the intent, it would be obviously to have Cedar Hill become their home course for both practice and for meets. I checked with them, just a quick check-in that as long as we meet the USPGA requirements for a par 5 hole, but they would gladly review and comment. So that's a box that we will check. There's no problem there. The second one was the applicant working with the course manager as far as advertising the benefits of playing there. If you caught the new town manager's presentation on the budget to the town Board of Selectmen last night, she clearly made a statement that the golf course has become sustainable, but going forward it will need a strong marketing effort to assure its sustainability. I found that to be particularly encouraging, but that is what Victor Baruzza, the golf course manager, indicated to you at the last meeting. So that's a commitment now that comes not only from the golf course manager, but from the new town manager. And then the last question, excuse me, I believe was about some form of return on investment. Obviously, this is not a private commercial enterprise, so trying to do this on a 10-year return on investment is a rather difficult issue. But it is a town-owned recreational facility that charges a user fee. This year, it's anticipated that retained earnings from the golf course will be $10,000, positive. It is reasonable to expect going forward that without these improvements, that's pretty much going to be the case. However, with these improvements coming into playable condition in the 2021 golf season, it's reasonable to expect that earnings will increase somewhat for the first couple of years. And with the plan of course management and now the town manager to rebrand Cedar Hill as a skills course, earnings would be expected to increase substantially from year 2023 ahead. Overall, I think it's reasonable to anticipate that the funds would be returned in about 150% over a 20-year period. I think that the $450,000 would be realized. That translates into the town not having to subsidize, if you will, as it has in past years. Again, the emails from the Cedar Hill Improvement Project, a nonprofit that is doing its work as best it can to improve the conditions at the courts. Play has increased dramatically this year, even though weather was not all that favorable in April and May particularly. So that is sum total of a new application, and I'm certainly open to questions.
Are any funds going to be allocated to improving the building?
Not from this application, not that I'm aware of. From the town side, I'm not aware. At the moment, I don't think there's any great need to do anything with the building. I don't believe there's any deficiencies within the building.
Can the building accommodate the anticipated increase in business?
Absolutely, no question about it. The caterer probably has room for... Dwight, can I ask you a question? How many people did you have at the annual Historical Society meeting a couple of years ago?
60, 65.
So it holds 60, 65 for a function. The lobby will hold, 6, 7, 8, 9 golfers at a time. It's a question, does they have enough carts to put people in, whatever, but I don't think there's a real push to have to expand the building. I certainly don't see it. I know that there was a fundraiser down there a few weeks ago that Mrs. Lindwall over here attended. There were 28 women in there doing these centerpieces, and it was a fundraiser. And the caterer was very supportive of it. So it's becoming much more of a sort of a go-to destination.
Yeah. Do you charge for a fundraiser in the place?
He didn't charge
No.
you. He had his bar open and he had food for sale.
I see.
Okay, so they were able to go in, and this was a non-profit type of fundraiser thing.
Does the town have the right to use the facility, or is it entirely now leased out to a manager?
No. The caterer has, I'm not sure exactly what his contract is, but the town can basically organize any function that they choose to within it. The golf course is separate from the recreation department. It's not a rec department facility. Okay?
So if the town wanted to advertise it as a venue for functions, the town could do that and receive...
Sure, they did the Haunted Hayride, which was canceled this year because of the wet field conditions. Yeah.
And the town could receive money for that.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
John?
Oh, go ahead.
Let me understand this. when we did the park project, the Cap Playground, I remember that the genesis of that project started with a scope of the project, which that started at $850,000. That was a engineer architectural company that came in and said the cost of doing this playground is $850,000. And then from there, as I recall, the town solicited in-kind donations of services, and everybody signed on to it. DPW signed to do so much of the work. But we started out with a professionally prepared cost estimate based on if it was all subcontracted out. It appears that what we have here is, as I understand it from page, it's not page, but there's some estimate prepared by one Forrest Lindwall.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. And there's text in here about in-kind distributions. And so my concerns are a couple-fold. Number one is the fact that we didn't have the Cap Playground type project scope. Not the narrative, but the cost prepared by about an outside company that basically
Why would you need an outside company?
Well, because
when I have 50 years of site development experience, and I'm giving you an estimate that I have signed off on, and I've given you a source, which is the Massachusetts Department of Transportation Highway Division. You can go on their website. They have weighted bid prices for every single project that was done for Mass Highway DOT, which are basically prevailing wage rate type projects. And those are the item numbers. You can follow right down on the book, every single thing. And that is the total scope of everything that's going to happen. First item is you're going to do clearing and grubbing. You're going to do some tree trimming along the edges. Then you're going to have excavation to do. Unclassified. Muck excavation is the widening of the pond. The gravel borrow is going to be the subbase for the parking lot. You're going to have fine grading and compacting of soils, both on the golf course itself and the parking lot. I use the item special catch basin, if you will, which is basically probably going to be one storm scepter for or a vortex unit for treatment, and a 10-inch drain pipe outlet. Hot mix asphalt for the parking lot, granite curb type VB, guardrail type TL2, loaming and seeding, erosion control, irrigation extensions, site lighting. That's the, the cost.
Let me just say that we had an article at town meeting, Mr. Lindwall, that was, because there was a shortfall in a major project, $880,000, that if, I wish we had the procurement officer here this evening to talk about this. The experience that the town had, that went out to bid, and the bids were checked right up until the 11th hour that the RFP went out. The RFP went out, and nobody came even close to those numbers that were prepared professionally. So my concern is that we don't have a project supervisor from the outside. I don't know if you're extending your own professional liability to us. I also see that you're the construction manager. So, I mean, due diligence with respect to municipal projects dictates some check and balance on the specs,
I think
the cost of construction.
I think you're misunderstanding the effort here. We've tried to put together a team effort, okay, with town staff and volunteer members of a golf course committee. We have the environmental affairs officer of the town, whose reputation is certainly upheld by Conservation Commission and anyone that's ever dealt with them. With the golf course manager, who's there every day and certainly knows construction and knows irrigation, okay, and someone who's sitting here who has done a wealth of good things for this community that has the capability of doing a site project. It's not a building, it's strictly a site project, and I can walk you through dozens and dozens of site development projects, ranging from small industrial, office parks, Home Depot, large box retails. I'll take you on a ride. We can go and we can look at dozens of sites. So I don't see the issue. We're trying to save money. If you were to go outside, okay, you'd be looking at $600,000 or more. This is a town effort. You should be supporting it. I'm sorry, I'm a bit offended by your commentary.
Well, I'm a bit concerned because that project that I mentioned, the water treatment plant, was professionally done from start to finish. It was a $6.6 million project with an $800,000 deficit before a shovel was even put in the ground.
It's a building project, and there's a huge difference, okay? And a lot of unknowns in any building project. And at the same time, when materials were coming online, the material costs were increasing exponentially. That is not the case here on site work.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Lindwall, on your own estimate. If the engineer listed on the project is Mr. Horsfall, is Mr. Horsfall charging us 7%?
No.
Okay. Where's the, can you explain that figure?
Yep. I think that there will be some costs on the permit side, okay? We will hire as I said, a wetland scientist, and that's included in that 7%. There will be ultimately a portion of this, and perhaps 90% of it, that will go out to bid, okay? In order for it to go out to bid, okay, the town engineer will be putting together a set of specifications, and those will go through procurement and become bidding documents, okay? So there's going to be some direct costs with respect to copying, making prints, etc. So I generally, if you look at any of the building projects that have been done in town, the first thing that Paul Jaffoon or the building inspector will tell you is that, the design cost is 10% of whatever the projected construction cost is. I've reduced that down, okay? That could go down to 1 or 2% depending upon how we are able to pull this together, again, as a town project.
Again, the concern I have is that we're in a period of hyper-construction inflation. And that project with the water, you tell me it's a building, but I don't know where the cost overruns were. And my concern was that I would certainly feel more comfortable if at least this project was spec'd out by somebody who looked at these numbers and said, I agree or disagree with those.
I don't understand why you want to go spend money and go outside. It doesn't make any sense.
Because I want to make sure that the project comes in at those figures. It's a substantial amount of money.
It will come in on those figures. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. And I apologize if I'm sounding arrogant, but it's what I've done for 50 years. Okay?
And I'm not doubting that, Mr. Lindwall.
Is the parking lot blacktopped at all now? Is this
Half of it is, and the other half is stone, gravel surface. And what happens is between the snow removal operations in the wintertime and just truck movement in interior, when the beer truck arrives, these are semi-tractor trailer, so they're constantly pushing that stone back and forth. So the idea is the asphalt has exceeded its serviceable life. So it's just going to rip up that asphalt, reuse some of that stone as base, okay, along with some gravel, and then put in new asphalt.
So it would be completely
From the curb line that is, you know where the telephone poles are laid down now as the edging?
Yep.
That's where the curb line would be, and it would go up to the edge of the woods across.
When would this be done? When would this be done?
The schedule that we put together, we would start, if this were approved in spring town meeting, we would start the design immediately. In fact, we wouldn't even wait for July 1st, I mean, as soon as we came out of town meeting. So we start the design permitting process on June 3rd, 2019, okay? We'd be going through and doing the design and filing of the permits, okay? And probably put this out to bid in August and receive bids from contractors in September. That would go through town procurement. Award a contract construction in October 18, October 8th, 2019. Get the environmental permits done October 2019 and start construction in November. So primarily in the winter, okay, with the completion being June 9th, 2020. Though
So
most of the work on the course itself could be done in the wintertime, not interrupting play, but we strategically laid it out so it wouldn't affect play. But then in the springtime, we'd do the finished paving and all of that work, okay, which would not necessarily disrupt the number of vehicles that are parking there.
Doesn't it take months to establish a green?
Then we're gonna wait, okay, okay? If it's done in June, okay, it will set all summer. It will be maintained, it will be mowed, irrigated, etc. It would not be eligible for play until the spring of 2021.
What would not be eligible, just that one hole?
That one hole that's expanded, yes.
But the
The rest of the course is still operational. There's nothing in here that would impact the operations of the golf course. Nothing at all. I mean, we specifically designed it so that this is the area we're working in, right in here and right in here. And then the parking lot. And the parking lot is just, do half at a time and then do the other half.
Does this include lining in the?
Pavement mark.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on Joe's question. So, Forrest, on your timeline that you just went through, item 11 on whatever page that is.
Yeah.
So the first three items refer to, the first one, survey, design, permitting. The second one, complete work plan for DPW versus contract bids. And third one, completion of design plan specifications. Who's doing that work?
The town engineering staff and myself, me assistant town engineering staff. The issue of the second one is to sit with DPW and decide how much of this they can do, or they can provide, or what commitment they would make versus what's all gonna go out to bid.
So the 7% engineering, not contingent, amount that says engineering and permits, you said permits were basically copy cuts. The 29,400, who's that going to?
At this point, I don't know. I just included it to make sure that if we do get into a particular point where town engineering staff says, no, we can't do this, or we do want to hire a consultant, okay, then it would go in there. So it is, I don't know best how to describe it. I'm just trying to make sure that it is covered if necessary. If it isn't, then it's a cost that we don't need to incur.
Okay. And then just a sort of a technical, the 7% seems to have included the 10% contingency, if my math is correct. Why wouldn't the 7% just be, why wouldn't it just be off the 381?
No, you would not, normally you'd include your contingency, engineering contingency. I should have put a subtotal in at that point, and then the 7% is off of that, but it does include the 10% contingency, which is a standard operating procedure in preparing any estimate for a construction project.
So back to your response that in case the engineering department determines that they can't do whatever, seems to go to the point that Mr. Scardino is making, which is, shouldn't we make that determination first? Are they gonna be able to do this or not do it? And if not, then don't we need to have a figure in there that would reflect a reasonable estimate of what that cost would be?
You know, it's kind of a...
I mean, DPW as well.
But you can't define all of those things at this point in the application. So I don't know how you word your approval in terms of up to 450,000. If you want to go outside and hire a consultant, this is going to come back in, and it's, I don't know where it's going to be. Okay?
No, I just
But
responded to your
why
comment.
spend
The
the
reason
funds,
for the
okay?
$29,000 figure was in case the engineering department determines that they can't do the work that you're anticipating that they would do.
Correct.
And my question therefore is, shouldn't we find out, can they or can't they? And if they can't, what would a reasonable number be if that work had to go outside?
Well, A, it's a reasonable number. B, as of today, okay, they can do this, okay? We also have other issues that come up on a regular basis, emergency issues that come up on a regular basis. Within the time frame that I'm dealing with, it's more important, I think, to get the project done on that schedule, okay, as much as possible, because we would like the work to be done in the winter to minimize, obviously, impact on the coast
let
plain.
me
So
ask
I don't know which way
Louise-
you would go with that number, Barry. to
Louise
go
has
to.
a question.
Yeah, just my question is on the preliminary estimate.
Yeah.
Are all those prices listed, including prevailing wage, labor?
Yes, yeah. Those are all Mass Highway's weighted bid prices for all the projects that have been done by Mass Highway up to the beginning of the middle of this year, first quarter of this year, okay? So they're relevant. And then the 10% contingencies is basically what has inflation done. Like the price of asphalt has gone up this year, okay? Cutting of trees, probably not, okay? Extension of irrigation, yeah, material costs have gone up.
But labor has.
Huh?
But labor has. In fact, there's a shortage of construction labor right now in Boston and the surrounding areas.
That's very true. There's a shortage
That's why I
of
said it's
construction.
referred to by experts as hyperinflation, which is why I'm concerned about the numbers. But I think I would also feel more comfortable if I got letters of commitment from DPW and the engineering department, and if the conservation agent has a substantial cost reduction role in this, from him as well, because we can't get to a point where DPW says, listen, we're having a storm every other day. We can't devote loaders to the golf course. I'm just saying that's...
I understand what you're saying, but I'm putting my reputation and my ability to get things done, okay, on the line with this application, okay? I mean, I walked into a situation on Glen Echo where you people were facing a $250,000 bill to go and do a survey, okay? And I went and I spent many, many hours, okay? And that conservation restriction has now been filed with the Registry of Deeds, and it cost this amount. I'm putting myself out here on top of this, okay? I signed this, okay? I have, I think, a little bit of credibility in the profession in terms of what I do. And
I'm not saying
putting
you
myself
don't.
out there.
I'm not saying you
And I
don't.
think the idea of you're gonna get an outside expert that's gonna give you a different answer is really an unfair question.
Well,
John has a question.
Forrest, my understanding from what you had said earlier was this is sort of a worst-case scenario, if they can't help. So you were already covering that?
I'm trying to make sure, okay, that this project can be done, okay, using a town team talent for $450,000. And if we can get it done for $395,000, then that's money that's not expended, okay? We'll find out, but you gotta start somewhere. And I'm not gonna make it $600,000.
Someone brought up Glen Echo, and this may or may not be helpful, but the last meeting, it was determined that the DPW will be the main contractor, but it's understood that their subcontractors that they always use will be brought in to do
And they
many
do,
aspects
yes,
that are
absolutely.
going along
Yep,
here. So I don't
yep.
know if this is the same principle
It-
where
it-
it
it
doesn't
is, in
necessarily mean that
essence, it is.
DPW will do it all, but their subcontractors that they use will come in and do X, Y, and Z.
They may agree to do the parking lot, okay? Now, they would do that by doing the granite curb that they would pull from their site on 138 across from Canton Street, their own stockpile, okay? But then they would have a subcontractor bring in, rip out the asphalt, bring in the new subbase, and lay down the asphalt, okay? I don't know which way that can go, but I know that this is a project that can be done for this price.
All right, we were criticized with respect to Glen Echo for not building into the price a management contract. And therefore, the town took on the management of the construction. And we vowed at that time that in every case where there was construction, we would pay attention to the management.
Yeah.
You were saying you would manage it.
Yep, absolutely.
And without a fee.
Along with the golf course manager, without a fee. He's a paid town employee. I'm gonna do that just as as a volunteer member of the Cedar Hill Golf Course Committee. And a person who plays down at Cedar Hill, plays golf there on a regular basis, okay? Going back to Dwight's comment with respect to Glen Echo, during the dealings with Wildlands Trust in Plymouth and the Division of Conservation Services in Boston, there was a lot of going back and forth in terms of what size should the parking lot be? What size should the comfort station be? Where would that be located? How do we get a gravel path down from the parking lot to the... There was a lot of re-engineering that was done, and yet we didn't change one commitment from the original purchase. So, I mean, because it's site, it's just, it's hard to explain, but...
Go ahead, Joe.
When the CAP playground came in front of town meeting, it was mentioned the first time, or the last time that CAP playground was done, it was done with volunteers. And the town, there's several people got up, and some of the comments were having to do with the liability, having to do with concern about cost. So I go back to that point. I would certainly feel much more comfortable with this project with letters of contribution from DPW, from engineering, and from the conservation agent as to what they feel they can commit to this project. Because I'm just concerned that this will hit spring and the parking lot will be ripped up and we'll have little or no revenue from that whole project because it's not ready. And so this isn't your main job. You're not being paid for it. And frankly, if you get,
this isn't my main job?
I'm just saying that.
No, I'm asking clarification. Are you speaking to me that this is not my main job?
I'm just saying that if you have a job that you're paid for, and it conflicts with this, what's going to receive the priority? Common sense would say, if you have an obligation to an outside project, that would come first.
That liability is going to rest in the town engineering department, okay? That's not going to rest with me, but it isn't about a paid job. This is about citizens trying to move the ball forward here, speaking in terms of the little white ball, and taking a gem and turning it into something that's even better, okay?
I would like to ask you to sort of sum up by giving us the rationale for doing this, so that we understand that what the value of spending $450,000 is.
Okay. If you go back to, I would say not the last 2 years, but years 3 and prior to that, okay? The course wasn't particularly well run, and each year it came to town meeting seeking a subsidy, and there was a lot of opposition from town meeting. 2 years ago, not so much. Last year, none whatsoever, and it still wasn't a break-even proposition last year. But 2 years ago, the town hired this golf course manager, Victor Perusa, and he has done a very, very good job of improving the conditions. And that has proven out this past year, again, with weather not very cooperative in the spring, to turning a $10,000 profit, if you will. We'll go into retained earnings, okay?
Yeah.
The course, other courses in the area, golf courses, are struggling, okay? Lost Brook in Westwood closed, okay? It was purchased by Meditech. They weren't making any money. I have heard that several courses around, I don't know if you've played Polka Pog lately, in Canton, there's grass grown in the middle of the sand traps. I mean, it's just not a good course to play golf anymore. It's difficult to maintain a course and generate the revenue to make it sustainable. There's a real commitment in the town of Stoughton, and it's listed as a gem in the master plan and in your open space plan. It's an asset that many communities don't have, that there is a solid commitment to make this a sustainable golf course, a go-to destination, if you will. He had a tournament down there this past September for first responders. They actually did it on 9/11. and they followed the time path in terms of when the first plane hit the South Tower in New York City. That was when they rang the bell to start the tournament. I mean, it was just a beautiful day. They had police and firemen throughout the region. I mean, from Randolph, Brockton, they came from all over. It's a community asset. It's cited that way in the master plan, repeatedly.
Let me ask you another question.
I think that's the benefit of trying to do this.
But you haven't answered the question of why the 450,000 makes it better. Why?
Because you're then going to take it into a course that can be used by a Stoughton High School golf team, which is all young people. Means that you will have golf teams from other schools in the region coming in to play as well.
Do they pay for that?
I believe they do, yes, yeah. And they pay for their practice runs as a part of the athletic department's budget. But you're generating more enthusiasm of young people, okay? The pro at the course is Walter Parshley, whom I think most people on this board would know. He does teaching down there, he does lessons down there. He does a bit of a mini camp, if you will, for a couple of weeks in August. He had to do double sessions this year.
I think getting back to really answering this question directly. I mean, you're wondering
Well, I'm
with a lot of values.
I'm trying to throw as much out there as I can, sorry, but.
But if you can just answer John's question directly, why should we spend the 450? What is it bringing us directly?
I think it's bringing you the ability of this golf course to become a sustainable recreational asset within the town of Stoughton.
Let me put one twist on that and see what your reaction is. Suppose we say that we would like a recreational covenant on the golf course so that it is forever. I mean, we spend 450,000 and then the town decides to build a public safety building on the course, which it could do.
Yeah, it could.
And,
Or it could sell it.
Suppose we say that part of this deal is that the town impose a recreational covenant on the golf course.
I wish I could give you a direct answer on that, because I would. I obviously.
But you could go to the Board of Selectmen.
I would have to go through the Board of Selectmen to do that.
That's a great
yes,
idea.
yeah. And I'm not sure.
I mean, would that be the kind of thing McNamara is asking for, but just in terms of recreation, or?
Well, you can either have a recreation covenant or a conservation covenant with the right to run a golf course. If you had a recreational covenant, you could do more than a golf course. You could put cross-country trails on it, you could put bike trails, you could put hiking trails, you could do a lot of things.
Just to clarify, the CPA statute doesn't require it, it only requires acquiring property.
That's
not if
correct.
you're improving.
That is
Right.
correct.
But
But
I
that
think
doesn't mean you can't do it,
I
it
think it
just
would be a
not
good
required.
benefit as part of this whole thing. I, for one, find myself in favor of supporting this. I understand your concerns about having an outside third party vet these things. I really believe we can save the town a lot of money the way it's being approached. If it goes over, we just saw what happened with a professionally, approached situation with that water treatment plant. It went way over. Best cost estimators in the world or whatever. I appreciate Forrest and the rest of the committee's willingness and the town employees' willingness. I would love to see letters of commitment from them as well. But, there, as you say, there are some areas in construction that are going up quickly, but I think I haven't had bad luck in some of my construction projects in terms of coming in way over cost estimates, and I appreciate trying to squeeze out the most value here without unnecessarily paying a bunch of people put a lot of words to paper. Basically repeat what you're saying
I
in
appreciate
your own way.
that. Thank you.
The only thing, I just might add one point to your comment, John. One of the things that it does do for town meeting, and that's one of the things that came out of the reactions to people at this last fall town meeting, was doing due diligence. And I think that some of the articles had to be pulled or modified or whatever because of the lack of due diligence. And you can never nail a number to a wall, and I'd agree with that. But the numbers become a little bit more tolerable, and even those numbers, as you just referenced my point about the water treatment plant, and I know it's not a $6.6 million project, but this is a little off the beaten path as far as town meeting. Again, it's considered to be somewhat of a luxury item. And so I think that there are even more sensitivity to luxury items having solid commitments financially and otherwise.
Let me respond to that.
Could I respond to that first a
No,
little
just
bit?
1 second.
Okay.
Here's my suggestion. We put this off to the next meeting. We'll put you on the agenda first, I promise, because you've sat through 2 of these already. You come back to us with better information about what the town's contribution would be, and you discuss with the selectmen the recreational covenant possibility, so that it would not restrict the golf course to it for anything except recreational use, any kind of recreational use.
Does that include barring the town selling?
That would,
land?
yeah, we could not sell the golf course for anything but recreational use if there were a covenant on it. That is correct.
How long have we had the golf course?
I don't know.
Many, many years, right?
What's that?
How long have we had the golf course? It's
Many
many,
years.
many years.
40-ish, like, because it was built by, I studied the history of it a little while ago.
It was,
You
like-
think-
it was, I was working recreation at the playground and had to clean it out when the town took it over. The
So-
basement.
so 100
Barry-
130
Barry,
years,
how
is that what
how
we're
old
saying?
was it?
A while
I'm gonna
ago.
say 76, 77?
But it predates that time period.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's been there for a long,
Oh, it was there
time,
before
so-
then, yeah. But
But
when the town took it over.
I'm willing to say that if we're prepared to think about, we may not even do it, investing much more money for our hope for the downtown, money, and more money, that my general position is that I'm ready to invest this much in keeping what this golf course brings to that side of town.
It's another asset for the town. It's to help the kids. I mean, I haven't said anything 'cause for obvious reasons, but it's an asset to the town. It's going to benefit our youth, which is a big thing to me. I had no idea that these youngsters could not play golf in the course we have in Stoughton because we don't have a 5-par golf hole, whatever you want to call it. They have to go to and pay money to go outside of town to play golf, to play their tournaments. So our Stoughton money is going outside the town, and we have a golf course, so let's improve it so these kids can play on it, and so that maybe other towns could come and use this golf course and pay money into Stoughton. And I did have a fundraiser there a couple of weeks ago to raise money for the beautification committee. And the proprietor there, who's running the concession.
Caterer.
He couldn't have been nicer. He let us use the place. He was just wonderful. A lot of people went up and they bought drinks, and they ordered food, which was very reasonable there. So, you know, and I have talked to friends of mine who golf. They used to go to the golf course in Norwood. What was the name of that?
Westbrook.
Okay. Well,
Westbrook.
that closed. And so, and these girls golf all the time. I used to golf, but I stink, so I don't go with them anymore. But that's beside the point. They don't go to Stoughton. They've been there, and they said it's kind of yucky there. It's not well maintained, so they go to other golf courses, Joe. They go to other golf courses, and, well, that bothered me. This is our golf course. Let's Let's make it a gem of the town.
With all due respect, we do have a hockey team, and we did not build an ice rink for the high school
No, we
men's and
don't-
women's
we
hockey
don't
team.
have an ice
And
rink.
I
We do
believe
have a
we
golf
are.
I'm not asking for $3.5 million.
I'm just saying that the argument that we have to provide.
But I do want to come back to something that Joe said, okay? As far as what I heard earlier this evening, loud and clear, okay, is that the applicant is the one that has to go and sell this to town meeting, not the Community Preservation Committee, okay? I have a pretty decent track record of selling things at town meeting. I think I'm 1-2 and lost 1, okay? It's on us. It's on myself, the Golf Course Operations Committee, the golf course manager, okay, and the town manager who wants to brand it as a sustainable asset to sell it to town meeting. So I don't think that having an outside firm coming in and turning this into a $600,000 or $700,000 project is going to increase the credibility of the project in front of town meeting. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen.
Go ahead, John.
Real quick, Forrest, beyond those letters we discussed, perhaps you should attach your own resume to it as well, just so, we can put that as your evidence of qualification. But I do think that this does speak to what this committee is all about. It's about community preservation, and this is a really unique community asset we have. And so I think it's, I just look favorably upon it. I feel like they're trying to do it in the most practical way possible, and I support it. Could support it more with some of the things that have been discussed, and we'll continue it.
I was just going to follow up, John, because what I said earlier, I just want to reiterate that I think it's important for us in evaluating any individual application to look at the totality of what we're going to be looking at over the next month or two. And with, as was stated, with no money remaining in the open space recreation fund, it means it's going to have to come from the undesignated fund. Something, Barry?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's as of the end of the fiscal year.
Right.
So there is money in it now.
Well, okay, but
The money that's in it now will be used to cover the bond.
Right,
fund.
right, it's
But,
not-
I mean, there may still be a small amount left.
Right.
not
But my point is still the same, which is, we potentially are looking at an open space purchase on Pleasant Street. And so my only thing, I'm just gonna reiterate what I said. I think what we should be doing is, come January, look to see what we have at that time. And then prioritizing the applications and making a determination based on the totality of what we have, including this application. The only comment I would make is, notwithstanding whatever powers of persuasion you may have on the floor of town meeting for us, we're still the ones making the recommendation to town meeting. So regardless of what, your track record may or may not be at town meeting, we're the ones making the recommendation to town meeting, not you. You then are charged with getting town meeting to sell it, but we have to make the recommendation.
I would echo, I was going to say what Barry was saying. It's not that we're just gonna flip it over to town meeting and see what they will do. We have an obligation to assign a priority and vote. So, I mean, I'm in tune with what you're saying, and the notion that we put this off until the January meeting and ask you to come back, I promise you, you'll be on the agenda right after the administrative matters, and we will vote then. I think that there's merit to this proposal, and I think there are a few questions. And I think that, given a month, you would have an opportunity to come back and respond to them. The two that I think are important is what would be the position of the Department of Public Works and the Engineering Department with respect to contributions to this project? And then secondly, to what extent can you come up with a case that this will pay for itself, that it should be a priority. Because we are going to be looking at a theater and at least this Hanson property, not to mention others that are coming at us. And we have to start assigning priorities.
I just don't want you to forget what you said earlier about the recreation covenant, just because I think we're investing money for a purpose here, and it would be lousy to have it flushed because town administration decided that we need to sell it.
Yeah. I would agree with that. That at least has to be passed by the selectmen. It should be a question that's presented and answered.
Is there some way that we can get an example or a sample of a recreation covenant? Because I've never heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same as a conservation restriction, except it's for recreation as opposed to open space. It's what they're trying to do at Glen Echo for that 6 acre set aside.
So is it going to be the same tedious, horrible?
Not really. I mean, it's
This hasn't defined.
recreation and conservation easements are rather standard documents. They basically say thou shalt not do anything on this property except for recreation. And, you know, recreation is a broad term, and it could mean a whole bunch of things. You don't try to itemize every piece of recreation.
And I suppose that it's fair to think about this as opposed to the Hanson property, and that the way they're set up, they're both coming out of the same pool, and it may be helpful in evaluating one or the other. 'Cause I'm not sure I think about the Hanson property, but they're both open space.
My struggle with that is that this is an asset that the town owns, and you're trying to make it something much better. The theater, the town doesn't own it.
I didn't say theater, I said Hanson property.
But the theater was mentioned as in terms of what you're looking at for priorities, okay? And then the Hanson property, of which the ability to own either one of those, okay? If I'm a betting man, that's not gonna happen between now and May. Seriously, it's not gonna happen. This is something that the town has owned, invested money in for many, many years, pays the staff to operate it and maintain it, and the town wants to make this, wants to improve this asset for the benefit of the community as a whole, for any member of the community. And so I guess I'm pushing back a little bit and not trying to be too aggressive, but this is old by the town.
I would tell you that I would come to a Board of Selectmen meeting with you, if you would like, to present what a restriction would look like.
Yeah, that might be very helpful.
And to talk with them about what contributions could be made by the DPW and the engineering.
Yeah, I don't have a problem working as far as the contributions from the DPW and the town engineering staff. I don't have a problem with that.
One possibility we haven't considered, and I got the thought when Mr. Crimmins talked about the priorities, is a situation where, again, the timing issue. Why would this have to be done this year? Could this project be done next year? Yes, we might not make as much money at the golf course, but Mr. Kelly would have put up a project that is not necessarily in the neighborhood or the town's best interests on the property. So in terms of weighing this possibility that this could be put off for another funding fiscal year, because I don't see, it's not like the Cedar Hill's going to lose its LPGA or PGA status because of them not doing this work. I just throw that out for consideration when we're talking about priorities, because that is a...
Well, I hear that, Joe, and it does have some merit, but let's say this. By the January 9th meeting, we may have more information about that as well, and about the theater.
I agree.
And so I would suggest that somebody move to continue this to January 9th.
So moved.
Motion's made, seconded. Any discussion?
Early on the agenda.
Early-
Yes, I have that.
Please.
Definitely early on the agenda. Any comments or discussion on that motion?
I'm sorry, who made the motion?
Me.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I think I need to recuse myself.
Thank you for what you've done. It's a lot of work.
Okay.
You may need to do that earlier in the discussion next time.
Way to go, Janice.
I wanted to wait.
You really can't, but that's okay.
I didn't know that. You can comment, you just can't vote on it, right?
No, not really.
Well, it's better to seek penance than
The word says
permission.
take no action, so however you want to describe that.
Oh, is
how
that
you
what it
wanna-
means?
Yeah. Well, that's what the wording is.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm trying to move on to the next item, and hopefully it's adjourned, but I haven't got the agenda.
I know, you haven't got the agenda, well.
John, while you're looking,
Yeah.
maybe, I guess, we are under old business, so
Yeah,
I want to bring up that issue that, and I don't think it came from us, but the issue of the responses to your questions that apparently went to some town meeting people, including some people in this committee, but not all town meeting people, and certainly not all people in this committee.
no,
And-
it did, I circulated it to all members of the committee. My memo.
Your memo, I'm talking about this 79-page
Oh, no, no, no.
response.
I take full responsibility.
I take
Well, I
full
don't-
responsibility for that.
Because I already given him grief, they're gonna send it to us, because he
It came
forgot.
to me.
Mary
No,
forgot to
we
send
didn't.
it.
Well,
None of
it
us
went
got it
to, it may have gone to you, it went to some town meeting members. but
They
not all.
sent it probably, right? They sent it.
I don't know.
I don't.
Because I didn't receive it.
I didn't.
No, I didn't either.
I spoke to several other people that didn't receive it.
No, I didn't, but I understood, they sent it to some people, and they sent it to our committee via Barry and John,
Yeah.
and they forgot to give it to us. I mean, that's,
We just
that's how I
didn't.
understand it.
Right,
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
My apologies.
No, I don't.
My apologies as well.
Whatever.
That's why I made
You
the
will
suggestion
get
that all
it.
the
You will
communication
get
go
it in the
in and
next
out of
24
there.
hours.
They get it later tonight.
Oh, I ultimately received it after being asked
You're ahead of me
that
then.
day, what'd you think of that email? To which I said, what email?
Yeah, right, right.
So,
And rightly so.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you didn't know.
right, right.
My apologies.
No, I don't mean from you, I mean
Oh, you do?
from its source.
You should mean from me.
Well,
Yeah, because
He
they
was
sent
supposed
it
to
to me
send
in
it.
good faith, believing that I would send it on.
I'll
And I
reserve the right to, for further attack.
didn't. Granted. We'll go outside. and
He's not gonna be
settle my
fulfilled
gentleman.
attacking you, John, he needs somebody else.
All right, any other business to come before this meeting? I think we can dispense with minutes and so on until the next one, it being almost 11 o'clock. Any other business to come before this meeting? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, and January 9th. For
January
January,
9th, 7 o'clock.
subsequent to January, we'll go to the first Wednesday of the month, is that the plan?
That's the plan.
Okay.
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Opposed?